The train station platform was empty except for one woman and a crying baby, and the devastating truth that no one was coming for them. Evelyn Carter had crossed half a continent for a promise of marriage, only to find herself abandoned in a dusty Texas town where mercy was as scarce as rain. But when a tall cowboy stepped forward and said those four words, "Let me hold you both," everything changed. Stay with me until the end of this journey and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The August heat pressed down on Willow Creek like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, unforgiving and relentless. Evelyn Carter stood on the weathered planks of the train depot platform, her dark traveling dress clinging to her skin, her arms aching from the weight of 6-month-old Clara. The baby had finally stopped crying, exhausted into a fitful sleep against Evelyn's shoulder, but the silence was somehow worse than the wailing had been. Silence meant Evelyn could hear her own thoughts, and her thoughts were a chorus of panic. He wasn't coming. She had known it, really, from the moment she'd stepped off the train and seen the empty platform. No eager fiancé rushing forward to greet her. No apologetic explanation about being delayed. Just the station master, a weathered man with tobacco-stained whiskers, who had glanced at her, at the baby, and then away with the kind of deliberate disinterest that told her everything she needed to know about her situation. "Ma'am, you'll need to clear the platform," the station master said now, his voice flat. "Next train don't come through till Thursday." Thursday. 3 days from now. 3 days that might as well have been 3 years for all the good it would do her. "I'm waiting for someone," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. She had perfected that voice over the past year, the one that suggested she was in control, that everything was proceeding according to plan, that she was not, in fact, a desperate woman who had gambled everything on a mail-order arrangement with a man she'd never met. The station master shrugged. "Suit yourself. But sun'll bake you like a potato before evening comes." He retreated into the depot office, and Evelyn was alone again with Clara and her 2 carpet bags, and a future that had evaporated like morning dew. She shifted Clara to her other arm and reached into her reticule for the letter, the one that had arrived in Boston 3 months ago, written in careful script that suggested education and thoughtfulness. "Dear Miss Carter, I am a rancher of good standing in Willow Creek, Texas, seeking a wife to help build a life on the frontier. I am 32 years of age, of sound health and moral character, and owner of 300 acres of grazing land. If you are willing to make the journey, I will meet you at the station on August 15th, and we will be married the following day by the circuit preacher." She didn't need to read the rest. She'd memorized every word during the endless train journey from Boston, analyzing each phrase for hidden meaning, trying to construct a picture of Thomas Whitfield from his careful prose. She'd imagined him kind, perhaps. Reserved, certainly. A man who would accept her situation without judgment, who would give Clara a father and Evelyn a second chance at respectability. She'd been a fool. "Excuse me, miss?" Evelyn turned sharply, her hand instinctively tightening around Clara. A young boy, no more than 12, stood at the edge of the platform, his cap pushed back on his head, his face smudged with dirt. "Are you Miss Evelyn Carter?" he asked. Hope flared in her chest, painful and desperate. Yes, I am. Did Mr. Whitfield send you?" The boy dug in his pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, already softened from handling. "Man at the general store paid me a nickel to deliver this. Said to give it to the lady who came in on the afternoon train." Evelyn's hands trembled as she took the note. She fumbled in her reticule for a penny and pressed it into the boy's hand before he scampered away. Then, with Clara still sleeping against her shoulder, she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was different from the letters she'd received, hasty, almost illegible. "Miss Carter, by the time you read this, I will be on my way to California. Business opportunity came up that I couldn't pass. I've left $20 with the storekeeper for you. Should be enough to get you back east. Sorry for the inconvenience. T. Whitfield." The paper fluttered from her fingers. She watched it drift across the platform, caught for a moment in a dust devil before settling against the depot wall. $20. As if that could undo the 2,000 miles she'd traveled, as if that could restore the life she'd given up, the position as a governess she'd resigned, the room she'd rented that had already been let to someone else, as if $20 could erase the fact that she was alone, essentially penniless, in a town where she knew no one and had no prospects. Clara stirred against her shoulder, making the small mewling sounds that preceded full-blown hunger cries. Evelyn swayed automatically, the motion so ingrained now that she did it without thinking. She needed to feed the baby. She needed to find shelter. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to salvage this disaster. But first she needed to sit down before she fell down. She made her way to the bench against the depot wall and sank onto it, grateful for the narrow strip of shade the building provided. Clara was waking now, her tiny fists batting against Evelyn's collar, her face scrunching in that way that meant she would be screaming within moments. Evelyn unbuttoned her traveling dress with practiced efficiency, arranging her shawl to provide some privacy as she began to nurse. This was what had made everything so complicated in the first place. This precious, innocent child who had cost Evelyn everything, her reputation, her position, her future. Not that Clara knew any of that. Not that she understood how she'd come into the world, or what it meant that she bore no father's name, or that the story Evelyn told strangers, that Clara was her orphaned niece, that Evelyn had nobly assumed her care after her sister's tragic death, was a lie constructed to make their existence bearable. "You and me against the world, little one," Evelyn whispered, stroking Clara's downy head. "We'll figure something out. We always do." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. There was a limit to human endurance, she was discovering, a point at which optimism and determination gave way to simple, crushing despair. She thought she might be approaching that point now, here on this God-forsaken platform, in this God-forsaken town, at the edge of nowhere. The sun crawled across the sky. Clara finished nursing and fell back asleep, her small body relaxed and trusting in Evelyn's arms. The heat was suffocating, even in the shade. Evelyn's head began to ache, a tight band of pain across her temples that intensified with each passing minute. She knew she should get up, should retrieve that $20 from the general store, should find somewhere to stay. But the effort of moving seemed insurmountable. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, just to rest. "Ma'am? Ma'am, are you all right?" The voice pulled her from the gray fog that had been threatening to claim her. Evelyn forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer sky. He held his hat in his hands, concern etched across his features. "I'm fine," Evelyn said automatically, the lie coming easily after so much practice. "Just resting." "With respect, ma'am, you don't look fine. You look about ready to keel over." He glanced at Clara. "That baby needs to be out of this heat. You both do." "I'm waiting for someone," Evelyn said again, the same words she'd told the station master, though they rang hollow even to her own ears. The man's expression shifted, not to judgment, as she'd expected, but to something that looked almost like sympathy. "The station master mentioned there was a lady waiting, said she'd been here near about 3 hours now." He paused. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but whoever you're waiting for, they're not coming." The kindness in his voice was somehow worse than contempt would have been. Evelyn felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "I'm aware of that," she said, her voice tight. "I've made alternative arrangements." It was another lie, and they both knew it. The man crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were approaching a skittish horse. Up close, Evelyn could see the fine lines around his eyes, the weathering that came from years of outdoor work. He couldn't have been much older than 35, though it was hard to tell with men who worked the land. "Name's Caleb Rowan," he said. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Came into town for supplies." He nodded toward a wagon hitched nearby, loaded with sacks and crates. "I'm not asking for your life story, ma'am, and I'm not making any assumptions about your situation. But what I'm saying is this. It's near about 95 degrees, you've been sitting in the sun for hours, and that baby needs care. Let me at least get you both somewhere cool, get some water in you, then you can figure out your next move." Evelyn wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. She'd spent the last year learning to depend on no one, to trust no one, to make her own way through a world that had proven itself hostile to women in her position. But Clara was stirring again, fussy and hot, and Evelyn's head was pounding so hard she could barely think straight. "I have $20, she said, hating how defensive she sounded. "I can pay for a room at the boarding house." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We don't have a boarding house in Willow Creek, ma'am. Closest accommodation would be back in Fort Worth, and that's a 2-day journey." Of course. Of course this miserable town wouldn't even have a boarding house. Evelyn closed her eyes again, fighting back tears that she absolutely would not shed in front of this stranger, no matter how kind his eyes were. "I'll make you a deal," Caleb said quietly. "You let me drive you out to my ranch. My sister Margaret lives there. She's the respectable one in the family, runs the household. You can rest, get your bearings, have a proper meal. Tomorrow, when you're thinking straight, we'll figure out what to do next. If you want to head back east, I'll personally see you get on the next train with provisions and whatever help you need. But right now, in this moment, the smartest thing you can do is accept help from someone who's offering it with no strings attached." Evelyn searched his face for any sign of ulterior motive, any hint of the kind of proposition that men sometimes made to women they perceived as desperate and vulnerable. She found none, just honest concern and what looked like genuine kindness. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "No, ma'am, I don't. But I know what it's like to be at the end of your rope. And I know that my mama, God rest her, would tan my hide if I left a woman and a baby to suffer when I had the means to help." He stood, settling his hat back on his head. "Look, I understand if you don't trust me. You'd be smart not to trust strange men offering rides. But I'm going to head into Clancy's general store to pick up some feed. You think on it, and if you decide you want that ride, I'll be loading up for the next 20 minutes. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect and walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts and her sleeping daughter and the impossible choice between pride and survival. She watched him go, this Caleb Rowan, with his broad shoulders and his gentle voice. He walked with the rolling gait of a man who spent most of his time on horseback, purposeful but unhurried. When he reached the general store, he turned back once, meeting her eyes across the distance, and then disappeared inside. Evelyn looked down at Clara. The baby's face was flushed from the heat, her dark hair damp with sweat. In sleep, she looked so peaceful, so innocent of the complications her existence had created. Evelyn thought of the journey back to Boston, if she could even manage it on $20. Thought of arriving with no position, no references that didn't lead back to questions about Clara, no prospects. Thought of the boarding houses that wouldn't take a woman with an infant, the suspicion and judgment that would follow them everywhere. Then she thought of this stranger who had crouched down to speak to her at eye level, who had looked at Clara without the barely concealed disdain she'd grown so accustomed to seeing. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. With effort, Evelyn pushed herself to standing. Her head swam for a moment, but she steadied herself and gathered her carpet bags. Clara woke at the movement, but didn't cry, just gazed up at Evelyn with those impossibly blue eyes that were her only inheritance from her father, a man Evelyn tried very hard not to think about. "Well, little one," Evelyn murmured, "it seems we're about to put our faith in the kindness of a stranger, again. Let's hope this one works out better than the last." She made her way to the general store, each step deliberate. Through the dusty window, she could see Caleb talking with the storekeeper, a rotund man with an impressive mustache. When Evelyn pushed open the door, a bell jangled overhead, and both men turned to look at her. "Ah, Miss Carter," the storekeeper said, and Evelyn caught the knowing tone in his voice. This would be the man Thomas Whitfield had left the money with, the man who knew she'd been abandoned. "I have something for you. Just a moment." He disappeared into the back room, leaving Evelyn standing there with Caleb, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I've reconsidered your offer," Evelyn said quietly, "if it still stands." "It does. I want to be clear. I can pay for my keep. I'm not looking for charity." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. "Understood. Though Margaret would likely argue that accepting a meal and a place to rest for one night doesn't require payment, but we can discuss that later." The storekeeper returned with an envelope, which he handed to Evelyn with obvious discomfort. "Mr. Whitfield left this for you. Said to express his apologies for the situation." Evelyn took the envelope without comment and tucked it into her reticule. "Apologies." As if that changed anything. "Thank you," she said flatly. Caleb was already moving toward the door with his purchases. I'll get these loaded and bring the wagon around. Be just a few minutes, ma'am." When he was gone, the storekeeper leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You know, Miss Carter, if you're looking for work, the saloon is always hiring. A woman with your attributes could do well there. Better than breaking your back on some ranch, anyway." The implication was clear, and Evelyn felt fury rise hot and sharp in her throat, but she swallowed it down, along with the dozen cutting remarks she could have made. She needed to conserve her energy for the battles that mattered. "Thank you for the suggestion," she said coldly, "but I'll decline." She walked out of the store without waiting for a response, back into the brutal sunlight. True to his word, Caleb was bringing the wagon around. It was a sturdy farm wagon, nothing fancy, pulled by two dappled horses that looked well cared for. He hopped down and reached for her bags. "Let me get those for you?" Evelyn hesitated only a moment before letting him take them. Caleb arranged them carefully in the back of the wagon, then turned to help her up onto the bench seat. She climbed up awkwardly, trying to manage her skirts and Clara simultaneously. Once she was settled, Caleb walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. "It's about a 40-minute drive," he said, taking up the reins. "The road's a bit rough in places, but these horses know it well enough. You just hold on to that little one and try to rest if you can." He clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward. The wagon lurched into motion, and Evelyn grabbed the edge of the bench seat with one hand while cradling Clara with the other. As they left the town behind, heading north into open country, she allowed herself one last look back at the depot platform, where she'd waited for a future that would never arrive. Then she turned her face forward toward whatever came next. The landscape opened up around them as they left Willow Creek behind, vast stretches of grassland punctuated by occasional stands of mesquite and live oak. The horizon seemed impossibly distant, and the sky was a dome of merciless blue. Evelyn had never seen so much space in her life. Boston had been all narrow streets and crowded buildings, every inch of land accounted for and built upon. This was something else entirely. Beautiful in its way, but also lonely, indifferent. "First time in Texas?" Caleb asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I've never been west of Philadelphia before. It's different out here. Takes some getting used to." He paused. "What part of the East are you from? Your accent sounds educated." "Boston. I was a governess there." She said it simply, offering the fact without elaboration. Caleb nodded. "That's skilled work. You must be good with children." Evelyn glanced down at Clara, who was watching the passing landscape with wide, curious eyes. "I try to be." They rode in silence for a while. Despite her exhaustion and anxiety, Evelyn found herself noticing details. The way Caleb held the reins with relaxed competence, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, the way he occasionally pointed out landmarks to help her orient herself even though she hadn't asked. "That's Broken Rock Creek over there," he said, gesturing to a line of cottonwoods that marked water. "It runs through the southern edge of my property, and that hill in the distance, we call it Sentinel Peak. You can see it from the ranch house." "How long have you been here?" Evelyn asked. 5 years this November. Bought the land from a family heading back to Missouri. They'd given up on ranching, said the land was too hard, too dry. But I saw potential. He smiled slightly. "My sister said I was crazy. Took her a while to come around, but she's here now, and she's got the house running smoother than I ever could on my own." "And your wife?" Evelyn asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back. It was too personal, too presumptuous. But Caleb didn't seem offended. "No wife. Haven't found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe the right woman hasn't wanted to take on a struggling rancher." He said it lightly, but Evelyn caught something underneath, perhaps loneliness, perhaps resignation. "Margaret keeps telling me I need to settle down, but..." He shrugged. "It'll happen when it happens." Or it wouldn't, Evelyn thought. She knew all about plans that failed to materialize, about futures that evaporated like morning mist. But she didn't say any of that aloud. Instead, she adjusted Clara in her arms and watched the landscape roll by. After another stretch of silence, Caleb cleared his throat. "Look, ma'am, I don't know your full story, and I'm not asking for it, but I feel I should tell you, small towns talk. By now, word's probably spread that you were left at the station. Folks will have questions, will make assumptions. My sister, she's good people, but she'll want to know enough to help you properly. You comfortable with that?" Evelyn's chest tightened. This was it, the moment where she had to decide how much truth to offer, how much of her story to reveal. The lies had protected her in Boston, where no one knew her history. But here, where she was already the subject of gossip, where her arrival and subsequent abandonment were public knowledge, what exactly will people be assuming? She asked carefully. Caleb looked uncomfortable. That you're a mail-order bride who got left behind, that you're in some kind of trouble coming all this way with a baby and no husband. And they'd be right, Evelyn said quietly, about all of it. She saw Caleb's hands tighten on the reins, though his expression remained neutral. The baby's father? Gone. Has been since before she was born. Evelyn kept her voice level, refusing to let it shake. I told people in Boston that Clara was my orphaned niece, that I was caring for her after my sister died. It was easier than the truth, but the truth is that I'm an unmarried mother who made a terrible mistake with a man who made grand promises and then disappeared when things got complicated. There. She'd said it. Let Caleb Rowan make of that what he would. If he turned the wagon around right now and took her back to town, she wouldn't blame him, wouldn't even argue. She was so tired of fighting, of pretending, of carrying the weight of her shame alone. But Caleb didn't turn the wagon around. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than judgmental. That must have been hard, managing on your own, raising a child, dealing with people's opinions. Evelyn blinked, surprised by the response. Yes, it was. It is. And this mail order arrangement, that was going to solve things? Give you and the baby a fresh start? That was the idea. Evelyn laughed bitterly. I corresponded with Mr. Whitfield for 3 months. He seemed kind in his letters, understanding. I told him about Clara, about my situation. He said it didn't matter to him, that he respected my honesty and was willing to accept us both. I thought... She stopped, swallowing hard. I thought I'd found someone decent, someone who could see past my mistakes to the person I'm trying to be. And instead he ran off to California. Apparently a gold claim was more appealing than a ready-made family. Evelyn adjusted Clara again, using the movement to hide the tears that were threatening. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You didn't ask for my life story. Maybe not, Caleb said. But maybe you needed to tell someone. And for what it's worth, Miss Carter, Thomas Whitfield is a damned fool. The bluntness of it startled a laugh out of Evelyn. A real laugh, the first in what felt like months. That's one way to put it. It's the only way to put it. Any man who'd leave a woman and a baby stranded like that isn't worth the powder it'd take to blow him to hell. Caleb glanced at her, and she was struck again by the kindness in his eyes. You're better off without him. Perhaps, but that doesn't solve my immediate problem. No, Caleb agreed, but problems have solutions, Miss Carter. We'll figure something out. We, as if this had become his problem too, as if he'd somehow taken responsibility for her well-being in the space of an hour's acquaintance. Evelyn didn't know what to make of it. In her experience, men didn't involve themselves in women's troubles unless there was something in it for them. But Caleb Rowan seemed to be operating under different rules, rules she didn't quite understand yet. The wagon crested a small rise, and Caleb pulled the horses to a stop. There it is, he said, pointing ahead. The Double R Ranch. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw, spread out in the valley below, a collection of buildings that suggested industry and care. The main ranch house was substantial, a 2-story structure with a wide porch wrapped around the front and side. Near it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. She could see cattle dotting the grazing land beyond, and the glint of water that must be the creek Caleb had mentioned. It looked permanent, established, like something that would still be standing long after she and Clara had moved on to whatever came next. It's larger than I expected, Evelyn said. Caleb smiled, and she realized it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles and making him look younger. We've put a lot of work into it. Still plenty to do, but it's starting to feel like home. He clicked to the horses, and they started down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, Evelyn saw a woman emerge from the house onto the porch, tall and sturdy-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She shaded her eyes against the sun, watching the approaching wagon with obvious curiosity. "That's Margaret," Caleb said. "Fair warning, she's protective of me, and she's going to have questions. But she's also got the biggest heart of anyone I know. If she likes you, she'll move heaven and earth to help you. And if she doesn't like me, then we'll deal with that too, but I don't think it'll be a problem." The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Margaret came down the porch steps, her eyes moving from Caleb to Evelyn to Clara, and back again. She was perhaps 40, with strong features and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Caleb Rowan," she said, her voice carrying both affection and exasperation. "What have you brought home this time?" Caleb hopped down from the wagon and came around to help Evelyn. "Margaret, this is Miss Evelyn Carter and her daughter Clara. They need our help. Miss Carter, my sister Margaret." Margaret's eyes softened as she took in Evelyn's disheveled state and Clara's sleepy face. "Lord have mercy, Caleb. She looks ready to drop. Get her inside right now." She turned to Evelyn. "Come on, dear. Let's get you out of this sun before you collapse." Evelyn allowed herself to be ushered up the porch steps and into the blessed coolness of the house. The interior was simple but comfortable. Whitewashed walls, sturdy furniture, colorful rag rugs on the wood floors. Through a doorway, she could see a kitchen, and the smell of something baking made her stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. "Sit," Margaret commanded, pointing to a cushioned chair near the fireplace. "When did you last eat?" This morning. On the train." It seemed like a lifetime ago. "That won't do. Caleb, get some water, fresh from the well, and bring that pitcher of lemonade, too." Margaret disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a plate of bread and cheese. "Here, eat this while I fix something more substantial." Evelyn wanted to protest, to insist she was fine, but the truth was she was ravenously hungry and desperately thirsty. She accepted the plate with mumbled thanks and began to eat, trying not to wolf the food down like a starving animal. Clara, sensing food nearby, began to fuss. "May I?" Margaret asked, holding out her arms. "I'm good with babies. Raised 3 of my own before they grew up and scattered to the winds." Evelyn hesitated, then passed Clara over. Margaret settled the baby in her arms with the easy confidence of an experienced mother, bouncing her gently and making soft, cooing sounds. Clara, surprisingly, quieted immediately, staring up at Margaret with fascinated eyes. Caleb returned with water and lemonade, and Evelyn drank gratefully, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. The food and drink were reviving her, clearing some of the fog from her mind, which meant, unfortunately, that she was now alert enough to feel the full weight of her situation again. Margaret and Caleb exchanged a look, one of those sibling communications that didn't require words. Then Margaret sat down across from Evelyn, still holding Clara. "All right, dear," she said gently. "Caleb's told me a bit, but I'd like to hear the rest from you. Start wherever you're comfortable, and know that nothing you say leaves this room unless you want it to." So Evelyn told the story again, this time with Margaret as her audience. She explained about Boston, about losing her position when Clara's existence could no longer be hidden, about the months of desperate job hunting that went nowhere. She told them about the advertisement she'd placed. Educated woman, skilled in household management and teaching, seeks honest employment, and about Thomas Whitfield's response, about the correspondence that had seemed so promising, the careful plans they'd made, the hope she'd allowed herself to feel, and finally, about arriving in Willow Creek to find nothing but an empty platform and a hastily scrawled note. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel and Clara's contented gurgling. "Well," Margaret said finally, "Thomas Whitfield is a snake, and I hope his California gold claim turns out to be nothing but fool's gold and rattlesnakes." She looked at Caleb. "We're keeping her," Evelyn started. "I beg your pardon?" "You need a place to stay, and we need help around here," Margaret said practically. "I can't manage the house and the chickens and the garden and the cooking all on my own. Caleb's been saying for months we should hire someone. Here you are, educated and skilled and in need of work. Seems like Providence to me." "Margaret," Caleb began, but his sister cut him off. "Don't Margaret me. You know I'm right. The girl's got nowhere else to go. She's clearly capable, and we're not sending her back to that town to face everyone's wagging tongues. Margaret turned back to Evelyn. You'll stay here. Help me with the household work. We'll give you room and board plus a wage. Nothing fancy, but honest pay for honest work. And your daughter will be safe and cared for. Evelyn's throat tightened. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, it's employment, Margaret said firmly. Lord knows I need the help. This ranch is growing, and it's getting to be more than I can handle on my own. You'd be doing me a favor. But you don't know me. Don't know if I'm trustworthy or competent, or I know you've traveled 2,000 miles on faith. I know you've kept yourself and your baby alive and healthy despite circumstances that would have broken a lesser woman. I know you're sitting here worrying about accepting help instead of falling apart, which tells me you've got backbone. Margaret's voice softened. And I know that sometimes people need a second chance. We all do at one time or another. Evelyn looked at Caleb, who had been quiet through this exchange. Is this really all right with you? It's your ranch. It's our ranch, Caleb corrected. Margaret and I own it together, and I trust her judgment. If she says we need you, then we do. He paused. But Miss Carter, I want to be clear. This is a real job we're offering, not some makeshift arrangement. We'll expect you to work and work hard. Ranch life isn't easy, but you'll be treated with respect, and you and Clara will have a safe place to call home for as long as you need it. A safe place. Home. The word seemed almost foreign to Evelyn. It had been so long since she'd had either. She looked down at her hands, at the worn fabric of her traveling dress, at the cheap wedding ring she'd bought herself to maintain her fictional widowhood. Then she looked at Clara, content in Margaret's arms, looking more peaceful than she'd been in days. What choice did she really have? She could refuse, could insist on going back to Boston with her $20 and her pride intact, could subject herself and Clara to another grueling journey, to the uncertainty waiting on the other side. Or she could accept this unexpected lifeline, this offer of work and shelter from people who seemed, against all odds, to be genuinely kind. All right, she said quietly. I accept. And thank you. Both of you. Margaret beamed. Wonderful. Now, let's get you settled. Caleb, bring Miss Carter's bags up to the spare room. Evelyn, I can call you Evelyn, can't I? You come with me. I'll show you where you'll be sleeping, and then you're going to take a proper rest before dinner. Evelyn found herself being herded upstairs, with Margaret still carrying Clara and keeping up a steady stream of practical talk about household routines and what would be expected of her. The spare room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the grazing land toward Sentinel Peak. There was even a cradle in the corner, dusty from disuse but solid. Use that for my youngest, Margaret said, noticing Evelyn's gaze. He's 15 now, and near about as tall as his uncle. But it's still good. We can clean it up for Clara. Caleb appeared with the carpet bags and set them gently on the floor. I'll let you get settled, he said. Dinner's usually around 6. Margaret rings the bell when it's ready. He left and Margaret handed Clara back to Evelyn. You rest now. There'll be plenty of time for work tomorrow. Today, you just recover. She paused at the door. And Evelyn, welcome to the Double R. Then she was gone, and Evelyn was alone in a room that was hers, at least for now, in a house that was offering her shelter, with people who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than she'd experienced in a year. She sat down on the bed, Clara in her arms, and finally allowed herself to cry. Great, gasping sobs of relief and exhaustion and something that might have been hope. She had no idea what would come next, no idea if this arrangement would work, if Margaret and Caleb would tire of her, if the town would make her life unbearable. But for now, in this moment, she had a bed and a roof and 2 people who had looked at her situation and chosen compassion over judgment. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Evelyn woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then Clara stirred in the cradle beside the bed, and everything came rushing back. The train station, the abandoned promise, Caleb Rowan's unexpected kindness, Margaret's fierce practical generosity, the Double R Ranch. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from the previous day's journey and emotional exhaustion. The room was still cool in the early morning, and through the window she could see the sky painted in shades of pink, and gold. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, vast and open, and nothing like the narrow Boston streets she'd known all her life. Clara was awake now too, making the small sounds that meant she'd need feeding soon. Evelyn picked her up, marveling as she always did at the solid warmth of her daughter's small body, the way Clara's fingers curled instinctively around hers. Whatever mistakes she'd made, whatever judgments had been passed on her, this child was perfect, innocent, deserving of better than what Evelyn had been able to give her so far. Maybe here, in this unlikely place, things could be different. After nursing Clara and changing her into fresh clothes, thank heaven she'd packed extra, Evelyn dressed herself in her simplest day dress and tried to make herself presentable. She had no mirror in the room, but she pinned her dark hair into a practical bun and smoothed her skirts as best she could. Then, taking a deep breath, she picked up Clara and headed downstairs. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drew her toward the kitchen, where she found Margaret already at work, her sleeves rolled up and an apron tied around her waist. The older woman looked up as Evelyn entered and smiled. "Good morning. I was about to come wake you, but I figured you needed the sleep. How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Evelyn shifted Clara in her arms. "What can I do to help?" Margaret gestured toward the table. "Sit down and have some coffee first. You're not on the clock yet. Give yourself time to settle in. Besides, this is already nearly done. I've been cooking for ranch hands for years. I can manage breakfast in my sleep." Evelyn wanted to protest, but the exhaustion of the previous day still clung to her, and the coffee smelled heavenly. She sat down at the long wooden table, settling Clara in her lap, and accepted the cup Margaret poured for her. The first sip was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. "Caleb's already out with the men," Margaret said, turning bacon in the skillet. "They start work before dawn this time of year. You'll meet them at breakfast. We feed everyone together. Fair warning, they're a rough bunch, but they're good workers, and they know to mind their manners around the house." "How many men work here?" Evelyn asked. "6, counting Caleb. There's Tom. He's the foreman. Been here since the beginning. Then there's James and his brother William. They're young but strong. Miguel came up from Mexico 3 years ago. Best hand with horses I've ever seen. And Charlie, who's older than dirt and ornery as a badger but knows more about cattle than the rest of them combined." Margaret cracked eggs into another pan. "They eat like locusts, but they earn their keep." As if summoned by the mention of food, the sound of boots on the porch announced the arrival of the ranch hands. They came in through the back door in a cluster, bringing with them the smell of horses and hay and honest sweat. They stopped short when they saw Evelyn, surprise registering on their sun-weathered faces. Caleb came in last, removing his hat as he entered. "Morning, Miss Carter. Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." The men were still staring, and Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. She knew what they saw. A strange woman at their table, a baby in her arms, questions written all over their faces. But before anyone could speak, Margaret turned from the stove with a wooden spoon in her hand and a look that could have stopped a charging bull. "This is Miss Evelyn Carter, and she'll be helping me run the household from now on," she announced. "You'll treat her with respect, you'll keep your questions to yourselves, and you'll be grateful for the improved cooking that comes from having an extra pair of hands in this kitchen. Is that understood?" A chorus of "yes, ma'am" followed, and the men found their seats with remarkable speed. Caleb caught Evelyn's eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile before taking his place at the head of the table. Breakfast was a boisterous affair, with Margaret and Evelyn serving heaping plates of bacon, eggs, biscuits, and gravy. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who'd been working for hours and would work for hours more. There was little conversation at first, but gradually, as hunger was satisfied, the talk began. "Those cattle in the south pasture are looking good," Tom said to Caleb. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and the calm authority of someone who knew his job thoroughly. "Should be ready for market come fall." "That's good news. We need a strong sale this year if we're going to expand like we planned." Caleb glanced at Miguel. "How's that mare doing, the one that was favoring her left front leg?" "She is better," Miguel said, his English careful but clear. "I wrap it, I walk her. Give her another week, she will be good as new." The conversation flowed around the table, talk of cattle and horses, of fences that needed mending, and a well that needed to be dug deeper. Evelyn listened while she ate, trying to understand the rhythms of this new world she'd stumbled into. It was so different from the genteel Boston households where she'd worked as a governess, where conversation at meals was about literature and music, and which families were hosting which social events. This was real, immediate. Life distilled down to the essential work of survival and the slow building of something permanent from raw land. "Miss Carter," Tom said suddenly, and Evelyn looked up to find all eyes on her. "Meaning no disrespect, but we're all curious. Where are you from?" "Boston," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. "I came out here for employment." "Long way to come for work," William said. He was young, probably no more than 20, with an open, friendly face. "Must be quite a story." "William," Caleb said quietly, but there was steel underneath the calm tone. "We don't pry into people's business at this table." William had the grace to look abashed. "Sorry, boss. Didn't mean anything by it." The rest of breakfast passed without incident, though Evelyn was acutely aware of the glances thrown her way. When the men finished eating, they thanked Margaret for the meal and headed back out to work. Caleb lingered for a moment, helping to clear plates. "They'll get used to you," he said quietly to Evelyn. "And once they do, they'll defend you to anyone who says a word against you. That's how it works out here. You're part of the ranch family, and we look after our own." After the men left, Margaret set Evelyn to work learning the household routines. There was bread to be made, vegetables to be harvested from the garden, chickens to be fed, laundry to be scrubbed. The work was endless and exhausting, but it was also strangely satisfying. Evelyn had spent years in other people's homes, caring for other people's children, always conscious of her status as an employee, as an outsider. Here, Margaret treated her like a partner, teaching her the specific ways of the ranch while also asking for her input and ideas. "You've got good instincts," Margaret said that afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing a stew for dinner. "And you're not afraid of hard work. That's worth more than gold out here." Clara spent the day being passed between them, perfectly content to nap in a basket or sit on a blanket and watch the activity around her. Margaret proved to be as skilled with babies as she'd claimed, handling Clara with the easy competence of someone who genuinely loved children. The days began to blur together into a routine. Evelyn rose early, helped prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent the day working alongside Margaret, served dinner, and then collapsed into bed exhausted, but somehow more content than she'd been in months. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time since Clara was born, Evelyn felt like she was contributing something real, something valued. It was on a Wednesday, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, that Caleb approached her with a proposal that would change everything. She was in the garden, pulling weeds in the late afternoon heat, when she heard his footsteps. Clara was napping in a basket nearby, shaded by the broad leaves of a squash plant. Evelyn sat back on her heels, pushing a strand of hair out of her face, and looked up to find Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Carter, do you have a moment?" "Of course." She stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. Caleb glanced around, as if checking that they were alone, then spoke quietly. "I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies. Margaret suggested you might come along." Evelyn's stomach clenched. Town meant people. People meant questions, stares, judgment. She'd been perfectly happy to stay at the ranch, sheltered from the world that would look at her and see only her mistakes. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said carefully. "I understand your hesitation," Caleb said, "but you can't hide here forever. Sooner or later, you'll need to face the folks in Willow Creek. Better to do it on your own terms, with someone beside you, than to wait until you're forced into it." "What will they say? What do they already know?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "I won't lie to you. Word has spread that you were left at the station. Thomas Whitfield's disappearance was the talk of the town for a few days. Some folks have been unkind in their speculation." "About me?" "About the situation. But Miss Carter, Evelyn, hiding won't change their minds. Standing tall and showing them you're not ashamed might." Evelyn looked down at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her basket. "I am ashamed, though, of what I did, of the choices I made that led me here." "Are you ashamed of her?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle. "Never," Evelyn said fiercely. "She's the only good thing to come from all of it." "Then hold on to that. You made a mistake with a man who didn't deserve you. You're not the first woman that's happened to, and you won't be the last. But you're also not defined by that mistake. You're a woman who's working hard, raising her daughter well, and building a new life. That's what people should see when they look at you. Evelyn met his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. How had this man, this stranger she'd known for barely 2 weeks, come to understand her better than people she'd known for years? "All right," she said finally. "I'll go into town with you." Margaret was delighted when she heard the plan. That evening, she insisted on altering one of her own dresses to fit Evelyn, a simple but well-made blue cotton that brought out the color in Evelyn's eyes. As Margaret pinned and stitched, chattering about who they might see in town and which shops had the best goods, Evelyn found herself almost believing that tomorrow might not be the ordeal she feared. Almost. That night, she lay awake long after Clara had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to prepare herself for what was coming. She'd faced judgment before, had endured the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the knowing looks from women who considered themselves her moral superiors. But that had been in Boston, where she could tell herself that these people didn't know her story. In Willow Creek, her story was already written, or at least the town's version of it was. She must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to sunlight and Clara's morning babbling. Today. It was today. Margaret helped her dress, fussing over the fit of the bodice and the drape of the skirt. "You look lovely," she declared, "like a proper lady, which you are, no matter what anybody says." Clara wore a little white dress that Margaret had produced from somewhere, with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem. She looked like an angel, and Evelyn's heart swelled with fierce, protective love. Whatever happened today, she would endure it for her daughter's sake. Caleb was waiting by the wagon, and Evelyn noticed he'd dressed more carefully than usual, too. A clean shirt, his good hat, his boots polished. He helped her up onto the bench seat with a steadying hand, his touch brief but somehow reassuring. The ride into town was quiet. Caleb seemed to sense that Evelyn needed time to gather her courage, and he didn't force conversation. But as they crested the last rise and Willow Creek came into view, he spoke quietly. "Remember, you haven't done anything wrong. You're just a woman who needs supplies from town. Hold your head high." Easier said than done, but Evelyn nodded and tried to project a confidence she absolutely did not feel. They arrived mid-morning when the main street was busy with activity. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, and immediately Evelyn felt the weight of stares. A woman in a green dress stopped mid-conversation with her companion to gape. 2 men on the boardwalk nudged each other and pointed. A girl of about 12 stood frozen, her mouth hanging open. "Don't look at them," Caleb murmured. "Look at me." Evelyn turned her attention to him as he came around to help her down from the wagon. His hand was warm and solid as she gripped it, stepping carefully down with Clara in her other arm. When she was steady on the ground, Caleb offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked into the general store together, and the conversations inside stopped dead. The storekeeper, the same man who'd given her Thomas Whitfield's envelope, looked up with undisguised surprise. Behind the counter, a woman Evelyn didn't recognize stopped arranging canned goods to stare. "Morning, Mr. Clancy," Caleb said evenly. "I have a list of supplies I need to order, and Miss Carter here would like to look at your fabric selection." Mr. Clancy found his voice. "Of course, Mr. Rowan. Miss Carter." He nodded at her with what might have been respect or might have been mere acknowledgement of her presence. "The fabric is against the back wall." Evelyn murmured her thanks and moved toward the indicated area, acutely aware of the eyes following her. The fabric selection was modest but serviceable, bolts of calico and muslin, some wool for winter wear. She tried to focus on the patterns and colors, but her hands were trembling too badly to properly examine the cloth. "That blue would suit you." Evelyn turned sharply to find a young woman standing beside her, perhaps 25, with auburn hair and a kind face. She wore a simple dress and an apron that suggested she worked in the store. "I'm sorry," Evelyn managed. "The blue calico, with the tiny white flowers. It would bring out your eyes." The woman smiled. "I'm Sarah Clancy. My father owns the store. You must be Miss Carter." "I am," Evelyn said warily, waiting for whatever judgment was coming. But Sarah just continued to smile. "Welcome to Willow Creek. I hope you're finding everything you need at the Double R. Margaret Rowan is one of the finest women I know. You're lucky to be working with her." The simple kindness of it nearly undid Evelyn's careful composure. "Thank you," she said quietly. "She's been very generous." "That's Margaret." Sarah lowered her voice. "Don't mind the stares. Small towns are full of busybodies with nothing better to do than gossip. Most of them are harmless, and the few who aren't, well, they're not worth your time anyway." Before Evelyn could respond, the door to the store banged open, and a group of cowboys spilled in, loud and clearly already well into their cups despite the early hour. One of them, a large man with a red face and mean eyes, spotted Evelyn and stopped short. "Well, well," he drawled, his words slightly slurred. "If it ain't the mail-order bride who got left behind. Guess old Tommy Whitfield took one look at what was waiting and decided gold prospecting was the better deal." The store went silent. Evelyn felt her face burn, felt Clara tense in her arms, as if sensing her mother's distress. She wanted to disappear, to run, to be anywhere but here facing this man's cruel mockery. But then Caleb was there, moving between Evelyn and the drunk cowboy with a speed that belied his relaxed demeanor. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but carried clearly through the silent store. "You've got 3 seconds to apologize to Miss Carter, or you and I are going to have a problem." The drunk cowboy laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. "Come on, Rowan, I'm just having a bit of fun." 1. "She's just some fallen woman who..." 2. The cowboy's companions were backing away now, suddenly very interested in the floor. The drunk man seemed to finally realize that Caleb was serious. He swallowed hard. 3. All right. The cowboy held up his hands. "I apologize, Miss Carter. Didn't mean nothing by it." "Then you'll also apologize for being drunk and disorderly in town, and you'll take yourself and your friends back to whatever hole you crawled out of." This new voice came from the doorway, and Evelyn turned to see a man wearing a sheriff's badge. He was older, with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen just about everything. "Sheriff Patterson," the drunk cowboy muttered. "That's right. Now get moving before I decide you need a night in a cell to sober up." The cowboys shuffled out, and the sheriff tipped his hat to Evelyn. "Ma'am, sorry you had to deal with that. Jack Dawson's always been a mean drunk. Doesn't reflect on the town as a whole." "Thank you, Sheriff," Evelyn managed. After the sheriff left, the tension in the store began to ease. Conversations resumed, though at a quieter level. Evelyn realized her hands had stopped shaking. Caleb had defended her, publicly, without hesitation. And the sheriff had treated her with respect, as if her presence in town was perfectly ordinary and acceptable. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. She selected the blue calico Sarah had recommended, along with some thread and buttons. Caleb completed his supply order, and Mr. Clancy treated them both with careful politeness as he totaled their purchases. As they prepared to leave, Sarah caught Evelyn's arm. "The church has a ladies' social every month," she said quietly. "Next one's this Saturday. I'd be pleased if you'd come as my guest." Evelyn blinked, surprised. Thank you. I'll think about it." Outside, Caleb loaded the wagon while Evelyn stood on the boardwalk, adjusting Clara's bonnet against the sun. She could still feel eyes on her, but the stares seemed less hostile now, more curious than condemning. Or maybe she was just getting better at ignoring them. "Ready to head back?" Caleb asked, offering his hand to help her up. "Yes, I think..." "Oh my goodness, is that Caleb Rowan?" The voice was feminine, cultured, and carried the kind of confidence that came from privilege. Evelyn turned to see a woman approaching, beautiful in an expensive sort of way, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls and a dress that probably cost more than Evelyn earned in 3 months. Behind her walked an older couple who bore enough resemblance to suggest they were her parents. Caleb's expression shifted into something Evelyn couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, Victoria." "Caleb, it's been too long." The blonde woman, Victoria, swept forward and placed a familiar hand on Caleb's arm. "Papa and I just returned from San Francisco. You simply must come to dinner and tell us everything that's been happening at your ranch." Her eyes slid to Evelyn with barely concealed curiosity and something that might have been disdain. "And who is this?" "Miss Evelyn Carter," Caleb said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's working at the Double R, helping Margaret with the household." Miss Carter, this is Victoria Pemberton and her parents. They own the bank and a good portion of the commercial buildings in town. How lovely, Victoria said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. Her gaze lingered on Clara. And you have a child. How quaint. The word hung in the air like an insult. Evelyn felt her spine stiffen, felt the old shame trying to reassert itself. But then she remembered Caleb's words from the day before. You haven't done anything wrong. Hold your head high. My daughter Clara, Evelyn said, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. She's 6 months old. Charming, Victoria said, already turning her attention back to Caleb. Now, about that dinner invitation. I appreciate the offer, but I'm busy with the ranch these days, Caleb said, gently extracting his arm from Victoria's grip. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Carter and I need to get these supplies back. Good day. He helped Evelyn up onto the wagon with what seemed like unnecessary haste, then climbed up beside her and clicked to the horses. As they pulled away, Evelyn glanced back to see Victoria standing in the street, watching them with an expression that was difficult to read, but definitely not friendly. Old friend of yours? Evelyn asked carefully once they were out of town. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. You could say that. Victoria and I, there was a time when people thought we might marry, but that was years ago, before I bought the ranch. She wanted a husband who'd stay in town, run her father's bank, host parties and social events. That's not me. She married someone else, a lawyer from Austin, but he died last year. She's back living with her parents now. She seems very interested in renewing your acquaintance. Victoria is interested in being the wife of a successful rancher now that ranching has become profitable, Caleb said bluntly. But she's not interested in the hard work it takes to build that success. She wants the result without the struggle. There was an edge to his voice that suggested history, hurt, perhaps even betrayal. Evelyn decided not to press. Whatever had happened between Caleb and Victoria Pemberton was none of her business. She was an employee at the ranch, nothing more, no matter how kind Caleb had been to her. Still, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between Victoria's elaborate dress and her own simple blue cotton, between Victoria's cultured confidence and her own precarious position. Women like Victoria Pemberton belonged in Caleb Rowan's world. Women like Evelyn Carter, unmarried mothers with uncertain pasts, most certainly did not. They rode in silence for a while, but it was companionable rather than awkward. The landscape rolled past, vast and golden in the afternoon sun. Clara dozed against Evelyn's shoulder, lulled by the wagon's motion. You did well today, Caleb said suddenly, standing up to the gossip, facing down Jack Dawson's rudeness, not letting Victoria intimidate you. That took courage. I was terrified the entire time, Evelyn admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. He glanced at her. You're stronger than you think, Evelyn Carter. The use of her first name, simple and unadorned without the formal Miss, sent a small flutter through her chest. It was too familiar, probably inappropriate, but somehow it also felt right, natural, as if they'd known each other far longer than 2 weeks. Thank you, she said quietly, for defending me back there. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Caleb said simply. You're under my protection now. That means something out here. The rest of the journey passed quickly, and soon they were pulling into the ranch yard. Margaret came out to meet them, her face anxious. Well, how did it go? Better than expected, Caleb said, hopping down to help Evelyn. Had a bit of trouble with Jack Dawson, but the sheriff dealt with it. Miss Carter handled herself with grace. Margaret beamed. I knew you would. Now come inside. I've got fresh lemonade and you can tell me everything. That evening, after dinner had been served and cleared and Clara had been put to bed, Evelyn sat on the porch watching the sunset over Sentinel Peak. The sky was ablaze with color, orange and pink and purple layered like paint on a canvas. She'd never seen such sunsets in Boston, where buildings blocked the horizon and smoke from factories dulled the colors. Mind if I join you? She turned to find Caleb standing in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. She nodded, and he settled into the chair beside hers, passing her one of the cups. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade and the first stars appear. Finally, Caleb spoke. I meant what I said earlier, about you being under my protection. I want you to know that's not just words. Whatever you need, whatever trouble comes your way, you can count on me. Evelyn looked at him, at his profile outlined against the darkening sky, and felt something shift in her chest. This man barely knew her, had no reason to care about her welfare beyond basic Christian charity, and yet he kept showing up for her in ways no one else ever had. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care what happens to me? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. When I first came out here, I had nothing but a dream and enough money to buy land that nobody else wanted. People in town told me I'd fail, that the ranch would break me, that I should give up and go back east. But a few people believed in me, gave me credit when I needed it, offered advice when I asked, stood by me when things got hard. Without them, I wouldn't have made it. He turned to look at her directly. I see something in you, Evelyn. Strength, determination, resilience. You've been knocked down, but you're still fighting. That's worth supporting. That's worth defending. Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone anymore. You've got people in your corner now. The stars were coming out in earnest, more stars than Evelyn had ever seen, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The night air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn felt something that might have been peace. Or if not peace, then at least the possibility of it. The road ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with challenges and judgments and the weight of her past. But she wasn't walking it alone anymore. She had Clara, sleeping peacefully upstairs. She had Margaret's fierce friendship, and she had Caleb Rowan, sitting beside her in the twilight, offering protection and belief when she'd given up hope of finding either. It was enough, more than enough. It was the beginning of something new. The invitation to the church social arrived 3 days later, delivered by Sarah Clancy herself, who rode out to the ranch on a gentle mare and stayed for tea. Margaret was delighted by the visit, and by the time Sarah left, Evelyn had been thoroughly convinced that attending the social was not only acceptable but practically required if she wanted to establish herself in the community. It's a chance for people to see you're just a normal woman trying to make her way, Margaret insisted that evening as they prepared dinner. Not some scandalous creature to whisper about. Besides, Sarah wouldn't have invited you if she didn't genuinely want you there. Evelyn wasn't so sure, but she agreed nonetheless. The alternative was hiding at the ranch forever, and as Caleb had pointed out, that wasn't sustainable. So on Saturday afternoon, she dressed in her blue calico, now properly hemmed and fitted, and let Margaret fuss over her hair until it was arranged in soft waves that framed her face. Clara wore her white dress again, and Margaret declared them both perfectly presentable. Caleb drove them into town in the wagon, staying unusually quiet during the journey. Evelyn noticed he kept glancing at her, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the right words. Finally, as they approached the church, he cleared his throat. If anyone gives you trouble, you come find me. I'll be at the livery checking on some equipment, but I'm not far. I'll be fine, Evelyn said, with more confidence than she felt. Margaret will be there, and Sarah seems kind. She is, but not everyone in town is like Sarah. He pulled the wagon to a stop near the white clapboard church. Women in their Sunday best were already gathering on the lawn, setting out dishes on long tables. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Evelyn said, touched by his concern. She let him help her down, acutely aware of the eyes turning their direction, the conversations that paused mid-sentence. Margaret climbed down behind her carrying a covered basket that contained her famous apple pie. Come on, Margaret said bracingly. Let's show them what we're made of. The church lawn was arranged for outdoor dining, with tables laden with food and clusters of women in their finest dresses chatting in groups. Children ran between the tables playing games, their laughter high and bright in the afternoon air. It looked wholesome and welcoming, but Evelyn could feel the undercurrent of curiosity and judgment beneath the pleasant surface. Sarah appeared almost immediately, her face lighting up when she saw them. You came. I'm so glad. Come meet some of the other ladies. She guided them to a group of younger women, making introductions that Evelyn immediately forgot in her nervousness. They were polite enough, asking careful questions about where she was from and how she was settling in at the double R. But she could see the way their eyes kept drifting to Clara, the calculations happening behind their smiles. Unmarried woman, baby, no husband. The math wasn't hard to do. "How old is your daughter?" one of them asked, a pretty blonde named Martha, who couldn't have been more than 19. 6 months, Evelyn said, adjusting Clara in her arms. "And her father?" another woman asked, more boldly. This one was older, with sharp eyes and a pursed mouth that suggested she considered herself the moral authority of the group. "Not in the picture," Evelyn said evenly, using the phrase she'd practiced with Margaret. Neither confirming nor denying, just stating a fact. The sharp-eyed woman opened her mouth to ask another question, but Sarah smoothly intervened. "Oh, Martha, didn't you say you needed help setting out the desserts? Evelyn, why don't you come with me? I want to introduce you to Mrs. Chen. She runs the boarding house over in Cedar Springs and has the most wonderful stories." Evelyn followed gratefully, escaping the group of younger women and their barely veiled curiosity. Mrs. Chen proved to be a tiny Chinese woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile that seemed entirely genuine. She took one look at Clara and immediately reached out to stroke her cheek. "Beautiful baby," she said, her accent thick but her meaning clear. "You're blessed." "Thank you," Evelyn said, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me." "Of course she is. Babies are always blessing, no matter how they come to us." Mrs. Chen's knowing look suggested she understood far more than she was saying. "You work at Rowan Ranch, yes? Good place. Good people." They talked for a few minutes about inconsequential things, the weather, the upcoming harvest, the best way to get babies to sleep through the night. It was the most normal conversation Evelyn had had with anyone outside the ranch, and she found herself relaxing, actually enjoying the interaction. But then Victoria Pemberton arrived, sweeping onto the church lawn like a queen entering her court, and the entire atmosphere shifted. She wore a dress of pale pink silk that probably came from San Francisco, or even farther east, with a matching parasol and gloves that spoke of wealth and privilege. Her golden hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to achieve. She was, Evelyn had to admit, stunningly beautiful. "Ladies," Victoria called out, her voice carrying across the lawn, "I do apologize for my tardiness. I was detained by some business matters." Her eyes swept the gathering and landed on Evelyn with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. "Oh, Miss Carter, how unexpected to see you here. I didn't realize the social extended to household help." The words were delivered with a smile, but the insult was clear. Around them, conversations faltered. Sarah's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Margaret stepped forward. "This is a church social, Victoria, which means everyone is welcome. Or have you forgotten the teachings you learned in Sunday school about treating others with Christian charity?" Victoria's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course, Margaret. How silly of me. Though I must say I'm surprised you'd bring someone with Miss Carter's background to such a respectable gathering. People do talk, you know." "Let them talk," Margaret said firmly. Anyone with sense can see that Evelyn is a hardworking, decent woman who's making the best of difficult circumstances, which is more than I can say for some people who spend their time gossiping and tearing others down. A few of the women made soft sounds of approval, though others looked uncomfortable, clearly not wanting to choose sides in what was rapidly becoming a public confrontation. Evelyn felt her face burning, felt Clara squirming against her shoulder as if sensing her mother's distress. She wanted to disappear, to run, to be anywhere but here at the center of this humiliating scene. But then Mrs. Chen stepped forward and linked her arm through Evelyn's with surprising strength for such a small woman. "Come," she said firmly, "we go look at quilts. Very beautiful quilts inside church, you see?" She practically dragged Evelyn toward the church building, with Sarah and Margaret following close behind. Behind them, Evelyn could hear Victoria's laugh, high and artificial, and the resumed buzz of conversation. No doubt they were all talking about her now, dissecting her presence and finding her wanting. Inside the church, away from the crowd, Mrs. Chen finally released Evelyn's arm. The older woman's face was kind but serious. "Do not let that woman upset you. She is like snake, beautiful on outside, poison on inside." "She's right, though." Evelyn said quietly, fighting back tears. I don't belong here. I'm not respectable. Everyone knows it. Respectable is what you make it, Mrs. Chen said firmly. You raise your baby with love. You work hard. You treat people with kindness. That is respectable. Fancy dress and mean heart is not respectable, no matter what society says. Sarah touched Evelyn's arm gently. Victoria Pemberton has been the belle of Willow Creek her whole life. She's used to being the center of attention, used to getting whatever she wants. But lately, people have been growing tired of her airs and her cruelty. You're not the first person she's tried to humiliate, and you won't be the last. The best revenge is to not let her see she's gotten to you. But she has gotten to me, Evelyn admitted. She's right. I'm just household help with an illegitimate child. What am I doing pretending I belong in polite society? You belong anywhere you choose to be, Margaret said fiercely. Don't you dare let Victoria Pemberton or anyone else tell you otherwise. You are worth 10 of her, and anyone with eyes can see it. Clara chose that moment to start fussing, escalating quickly into a full-blown cry that echoed through the empty church. Evelyn bounced her automatically, but the baby was working herself into a state, her face red and scrunched with distress. She needed to be fed, but that would require privacy that Evelyn wasn't sure she could find here. There's a room in the back, Sarah said quickly, as if reading her mind. The pastor's study. You can use it. I'll make sure no one disturbs you. Evelyn followed Sarah through the church to a small, quiet room lined with books. Sarah closed the door behind them, giving Evelyn the privacy she needed. As she settled into a chair and began to nurse Clara, she finally let the tears come. Silent, frustrated tears that she'd been holding back since Victoria's arrival. Why had she thought this could work? Why had she believed she could just show up in a new town and people would accept her? She was damaged goods, a fallen woman, exactly the kind of person respectable society was designed to exclude. All the hard work at the ranch, all of Caleb's kindness and Margaret's friendship couldn't change the fundamental fact of who she was and what she'd done. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiral of self-pity. It's me, Sarah said quietly. Can I come in? Yes, Evelyn said, quickly wiping her eyes. Sarah entered, closing the door behind her. She pulled up another chair and sat down, her expression sympathetic. I'm so sorry about Victoria. She was completely out of line. She was telling the truth, Evelyn said flatly. I am what she said I am. No, you're not. You're a woman who made a mistake and had the courage to face the consequences instead of running away. Do you know how many women in this town have whispered secrets they'd die before admitting? How many hasty marriages covered up situations just like yours? You're not the first unwed mother in Texas, Evelyn. You're just the most honest one. Evelyn looked up at that, surprised. What do you mean? Sarah's mouth curved in a wry smile. You think Victoria Pemberton is some paragon of virtue? Her first baby came 7 months after her wedding. Everyone knew, but everyone pretended not to notice because her family has money and influence. That's how it works. If you're wealthy, your sins are overlooked. If you're not, they're used to destroy you. It's not fair, and it's not right, but it's reality. I didn't know, Evelyn said quietly. Most people don't talk about it. But my mother was the midwife here for 30 years before she died. She knew everyone's secrets, and she taught me that judging people for their worst moments is the cruelest thing you can do. Sarah leaned forward. Give the town time. Let them see who you really are. A good mother, a hard worker, someone worth knowing. They'll come around. Most of them, anyway. Claire had finished nursing and was already drowsing in Evelyn's arms, satisfied and peaceful. Evelyn adjusted her clothing and stood, feeling somewhat steadier. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. That's what friends do, Sarah said simply. Now, are you ready to go back out there? Because if we stay hidden, it lets Victoria think she's won, and I really don't want to give her that satisfaction. Evelyn took a deep breath and nodded. All right, let's go. They emerged from the church to find the social in full swing. The earlier tension seemed to have dissipated, replaced by the normal bustle of women serving food and catching up on gossip. Victoria was holding court near the dessert table, surrounded by admirers, but she didn't even glance in Evelyn's direction when she reappeared. Whether that was a good sign or a bad one, Evelyn couldn't tell. Margaret appeared at her elbow with a plate of food. Eat something. You look like you're about to fall over. Evelyn accepted the plate gratefully and found a relatively quiet corner where she could sit and eat while holding Clara. A few women nodded at her as they passed, and one older lady even stopped to admire the baby and ask her name. Small kindnesses, but they mattered more than Evelyn could have explained. She was halfway through her meal when she noticed a commotion near the church entrance. The crowd parted, and she saw Caleb striding across the lawn with purpose in every step. His face was set in hard lines, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. He scanned the gathering until his eyes found Victoria, and then he headed straight for her. "Miss Pemberton," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "Might I have a word?" Victoria turned with a practiced smile. "Why, Caleb, how lovely to see you. I didn't know you were attending the social." "I'm not. I'm here because I heard you insulted Miss Carter earlier, and I wanted to make something very clear." He looked around at the gathered women, making sure he had everyone's attention. "Evelyn Carter is employed at my ranch, which makes her part of the Double R family. Anyone who insults her insults me. Anyone who tries to make her feel unwelcome in this town will find themselves unwelcome at my ranch and at my business. I hope I'm making myself perfectly clear." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's smile had frozen on her face, and her cheeks were flushed with what might have been embarrassment or anger. Margaret was grinning openly, clearly delighted. Sarah looked like she was trying not to laugh, and the other women were staring at Caleb with expressions ranging from shock to approval to calculation. "Caleb, really," Victoria said, her voice strained, "I don't know what you've been told, but I was simply making an observation about propriety. Surely you can understand." "I understand perfectly," Caleb interrupted. "I understand that you think your family's money gives you the right to look down on people who are worth 10 of you. I understand that you're so concerned with appearances that you've forgotten basic human decency. And I understand that if you ever speak to Miss Carter with anything less than respect again, you and I are done, permanently." He turned on his heel and walked directly to where Evelyn sat, frozen with her plate in one hand and Clara in the other. The entire social was watching now, every eye on them, but Caleb didn't seem to care. He looked down at her, and some of the hardness left his expression. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Yes. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He glanced around at the watching crowd. "I should have done it the moment I heard what happened. Nobody treats you that way, not while I'm around." Evelyn felt something warm and complicated unfurl in her chest. No one had ever defended her like this, publicly, without hesitation, risking social consequences to stand up for her honor. She didn't know how to process it, how to understand what it meant. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, then looked at Margaret. "I think it's time we headed home, don't you?" Margaret was still grinning. "I think that's an excellent idea. Evelyn, gather your things. We're leaving before anyone else has a chance to make a fool of themselves." The ride back to the ranch was quiet at first, with Evelyn still processing what had happened. She could feel Caleb's tension in the way he held the reins, in the set of his shoulders. Finally, she found her voice. "You shouldn't have done that. Victoria Pemberton's family is powerful. You could have made an enemy." "I made an enemy the day I refused to dance to their tune," Caleb said flatly. "Victoria wants what she can't have, and her father wants control over every successful enterprise in the county. They were never really my friends, just people who saw me as useful. I'm done pretending otherwise." "But your business? My business will be fine," the drama swirling around them. "I'm not used to people standing up for me. It's difficult to trust." "I know," Caleb said, his voice gentling, "but you're going to have to learn. Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Margaret. And we're not going to stop defending you just because it's uncomfortable or risky. That's what family does." Family. The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She hadn't had family, real family, the kind that stood by you unconditionally, since her parents died when she was 16. She'd been alone for so long, fighting every battle by herself, that the idea of having people in her corner seemed almost impossible to believe. But here was Caleb, who'd just publicly declared his support for her in front of half the town. Here was Margaret, who'd taken her in without question and treated her like a sister. Here was Sarah, who'd offered friendship without expecting anything in return. Maybe, impossibly, she really did have family now. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The weeks that followed were strange ones. Word spread quickly about Caleb's confrontation with Victoria, and opinion in town seemed divided. Some people thought he was right to defend his employee, while others whispered that there must be something improper going on at the Double R for him to be so protective of a woman with Evelyn's reputation. The gossip followed Evelyn every time she went to town, but she was learning to hold her head high and ignore it, just as Caleb had taught her. The ranch work continued, endless and exhausting, but also satisfying in ways Evelyn hadn't expected. She was learning to make butter and cheese, to preserve vegetables for the winter, to manage the chickens and collect eggs without getting pecked. Clara was thriving too, growing plumper and more alert, fascinated by the animals and the wide open spaces. Margaret declared her the sweetest baby she'd ever known, and even the ranch hands had grown fond of her, taking turns making silly faces to earn her gummy smiles. Evelyn found herself settling into a rhythm, into a life that felt almost normal. She woke with the sun, worked hard all day, fell into bed exhausted at night. It was simple, but it was hers in a way nothing in Boston had ever been. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something. But there was one complication she hadn't anticipated, one problem that grew larger with each passing day. She was falling for Caleb Rowan. It happened gradually, in small moments she barely noticed at first. The way he always made sure she had a chair at the dinner table, even when the ranch hands were crowded around. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her opinions mattered. The way he played with Clara, lifting her high in the air and making her giggle with pure baby joy. The way his rare smiles transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less burdened. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to someone who'd shown her kindness when she desperately needed it. But gratitude didn't explain the way her heart raced when he walked into a room, or the way she found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, or the way she lay awake at night thinking about the sound of his voice and the strength of his hands. It was foolish, she knew, dangerous. Caleb Rowan was her employer, a man far above her station, someone who'd shown her charity out of the goodness of his heart. He saw her as a woman in need of help, nothing more. And even if by some miracle he did feel something for her, she had nothing to offer him but her tarnished reputation and her illegitimate daughter. Men like Caleb married women like Victoria Pemberton, women with family connections and spotless reputations and the ability to move through society without causing scandal. They didn't marry fallen women who arrived at train stations with babies and broken dreams. So Evelyn tried to keep her feelings locked away, tried to maintain proper distance, tried to remember her place. But it got harder every day, especially when Caleb would do something thoughtful or kind, when he'd look at her with those summer sky eyes and make her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than society said she was. The harvest dance came in early October, when the first cutting of hay was done and the cattle had been moved to winter pasture. It was tradition, Margaret explained, for the whole town to gather at the largest barn in the county for an evening of music and dancing. Everyone would be there, ranchers and shopkeepers, families and single folks, young and old. "You have to come," Margaret insisted when Evelyn expressed reluctance. "It's the social event of the season. Besides, you can't hide from the town forever." "I'm not hiding, I'm just being practical." "You're being a coward," Margaret said bluntly, then softened her tone. "Look, I know Victoria Pemberton made you feel unwelcome at the church social, but that was months ago, and people have moved on, most of them anyway. You'll have a good time, I promise. There'll be music and dancing and more food than you can imagine, and I'll be right there with you the whole time." In the end, Evelyn agreed, mostly because refusing seemed like it would just prove Margaret's point about hiding. But as the day of the dance approached, she grew increasingly anxious. She had nothing appropriate to wear. Her few dresses were serviceable for work, but hardly suitable for dancing. Margaret solved that problem by presenting her with a dress in deep green cotton, simply made but flattering, that brought out the color of her eyes. "Where did this come from?" Evelyn asked, running her fingers over the soft fabric. "I made it," Margaret said, looking pleased with herself. "Well, Sarah helped. We've been working on it for weeks. Consider it an early Christmas present." Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't know what to say. It's beautiful." "Then say you'll wear it to the dance and have a wonderful time. That's all the thanks I need." The night of the dance arrived with a sky full of stars and a cool breeze that hinted at the coming winter. Evelyn dressed carefully in her green dress, pinning her hair up and allowing herself a moment to appreciate how she looked in Margaret's small mirror. She looked different than she had in Boston. Healthier, stronger, more alive. The ranch had changed her in ways that went beyond the physical. Clara was staying with Mrs. Chen for the evening. The older woman had offered to watch her, saying she missed having babies around. Evelyn had been hesitant to leave her daughter, but Margaret had insisted it would be good for both of them to have a break from each other. When Evelyn came downstairs, she found Caleb waiting in the front room, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He'd dressed up too, a clean white shirt, a vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. He looked handsome in a rugged, uncomplicated way that made her heart do complicated things. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "That's a beautiful dress." "Margaret made it," Evelyn said, suddenly shy. "She has good taste." He was still staring at her in a way that made her feel warm and nervous and hopeful all at once. Then Margaret bustled in, breaking the moment, and they all headed out to the wagon. The barn was already crowded when they arrived, lit by dozens of lanterns that cast a warm golden glow over everything. A band was setting up in one corner, fiddle, guitar, and banjo, and long tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. People clustered in groups, talking and laughing, and children ran wild, freed from their usual constraints. It looked magical, like something from a fairy tale, and despite her nervousness, Evelyn felt a flutter of excitement. Sarah found them almost immediately, looking pretty in a blue dress. "You came! And don't you look lovely? Come on, let's get some cider before the music starts." The evening passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversations. Most people were friendly enough, though Evelyn noticed the way some of the more prominent families kept their distance, the way certain women looked at her with barely concealed disdain. But there were also genuine smiles, kind words, an invitation for Mrs. Chen to visit for tea. It was a mixed reception, but better than she'd feared. When the music started, couples began to pair off for dancing. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, content to observe. She'd never been much of a dancer anyway, and she certainly didn't expect anyone to ask her. But then Caleb appeared at her elbow, his hand extended. "Dance with me?" he asked simply. Evelyn's heart leaped into her throat. I'm not very good." "Neither am I. We'll muddle through together." She looked at his outstretched hand, at his patient expression, and made a decision. She placed her hand in his and let him lead her onto the floor. The dance was simple, just a basic pattern that even Evelyn could follow. But being this close to Caleb, feeling his hand warm against her waist, smelling the clean scent of soap and leather, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. She tried to focus on the steps, on not trampling his feet, but all she could really think about was how right this felt, how natural. "You're doing fine," Caleb said quietly, guiding her through a turn. "I'm concentrating very hard on not embarrassing myself." He laughed, and the sound made her smile. Around them, other couples spun and swayed, lost in their own private worlds. The music swelled, fiddle and guitar weaving together in an old melody that spoke of longing and hope and the simple joy of being alive. "Evelyn," Caleb said, and something in his voice made her look up and meet his eyes. "I want you to know—" But whatever he wanted her to know was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. The music faltered and stopped as people turned to look. Evelyn followed their gaze and felt her stomach drop. Standing in the doorway, looking around with an expression of barely concealed contempt, was Victoria Pemberton. But she wasn't alone. On her arm was a tall man in an expensive suit, silver-haired and distinguished, who surveyed the gathering with the cool assessment of someone evaluating livestock. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria called out, her voice cutting through the sudden quiet, "I do apologize for the interruption, but I have some news that I simply couldn't wait until morning to share." She swept into the barn with the man following, and the crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow. Evelyn noticed that Caleb had gone very still beside her, his jaw tight. "As many of you know, my late husband left me with significant property holdings," Victoria continued, "and I've recently entered into a business partnership that I believe will be very beneficial for our entire community." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. May I present Mr. Harold Whitmore, a very successful businessman from Dallas who specializes in land development. The man, Whitmore, nodded acknowledgement of the crowd. Thank you, Miss Pemberton. I'm pleased to meet you all, and I look forward to bringing progress and prosperity to Willow Creek. Victoria's eyes found Caleb and Evelyn in the crowd, and her smile sharpened. Mr. Whitmore and I will be partnering to purchase several properties in the area for development. We believe there's great potential for growth here, and we're prepared to make very generous offers to landowners who might be interested in selling. In fact, we've already identified several prime properties, including, she paused dramatically, the Double R Ranch. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Caleb's hand tightened on Evelyn's waist, and when she glanced up at him, his face was expressionless in a way that frightened her more than anger would have. The Double R isn't for sale, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the barn. Oh, I know that's your current position, Victoria said sweetly, but Mr. Whitmore is prepared to make an offer that I think you'll find very difficult to refuse. We'll be calling on you next week to discuss details, but tonight is for celebration, not business. Please continue dancing. Don't let us interrupt your festivities. The music started up again, hesitant at first, then gaining confidence. But the easy joy of earlier had evaporated, replaced by a tension that hung thick in the air. Victoria and Whitmore moved through the crowd, shaking hands and making introductions, leaving a wake of whispered speculation behind them. Caleb stood frozen on the dance floor, and Evelyn could feel the anger radiating from him in waves. Caleb, she said softly, maybe we should— I need some air, he said abruptly. And before she could respond, he was striding toward the barn doors, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the floor. People were staring now, and Evelyn felt the weight of their gazes. She made her way to the sidelines where Margaret was waiting, her face concerned. What just happened? Evelyn asked. Margaret's expression was grim. Victoria Pemberton just declared war on my brother. And God help us all, because when that woman wants something, she doesn't stop until she gets it. Evelyn found Caleb behind the barn, leaning against the weathered wood and staring up at the star-filled sky. His shoulders were rigid with tension, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle him, and when he finally noticed her presence, something in his expression softened. You shouldn't be out here, he said. People will talk. People are already talking, Evelyn replied, stopping a few feet away from him. That's never going to change, so I might as well do what I think is right. And right now, I think you shouldn't be alone. Caleb let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't sounded so tired. Victoria's timing is impeccable. She knows exactly how to cause maximum damage. What does she want? Really want, I mean. Control, Caleb said flatly. She wants me to fail, to prove that I made a mistake choosing the ranch over her and her father's business empire. And if she can't have that, she'll settle for forcing me to sell so she can claim she drove me out. He pushed away from the barn wall, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The Double R is everything to me, Evelyn. It's 5 years of backbreaking work, of gambling everything I had on this land. I've poured my soul into making it succeed. And now she shows up with some Dallas businessman and acts like it's just another property to be bought and sold. Evelyn could hear the pain beneath his anger, the fear he was trying so hard to hide. She moved closer, close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she'd dared. Can she actually force you to sell? Not directly, but she can make things difficult. Her father owns the bank. He could call in my loans, refuse to extend credit. She has connections with the railroad, with the cattle buyers, with half the merchants in town. If she decides to make trouble, she can strangle my business until selling becomes the only option. His jaw tightened. And bringing in Whitmore suggests she's serious. He's got a reputation for aggressive acquisition. He finds properties he wants, makes an offer, and if that's refused, he uses every dirty trick in the book to force the sale. There must be something you can do. Some way to fight back. I'm working on it. Tom and I have been talking to other ranchers, trying to form an alliance so we can negotiate better prices as a group. If we can bypass some of Victoria's father's business interests, reduce our dependence on the local bank, but it takes time. Time I might not have if Whitmore decides to move fast. They stood in silence for a moment, the music from inside the barn drifting out to them, incongruously cheerful against the weight of their conversation. Evelyn thought about everything Caleb had done for her. The shelter he'd provided, the protection he'd offered, the way he'd defended her honor without hesitation. And now he was facing the possibility of losing everything because of a woman's petty vindictiveness. "Why does she hate you so much?" Evelyn asked quietly. "It can't just be because you refused to marry her years ago." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Victoria and I were engaged once. Did you know that?" Evelyn's heart stuttered. "No. No one mentioned. It was 7 years ago. I was 28, working as a ranch foreman for her father. Victoria was 23, and the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. She seemed interested in me, and I was flattered. Her father approved. I think he saw me as someone he could mold, someone who'd be grateful for the opportunity to marry into his family." Caleb's mouth twisted. "We were engaged for 6 months. I thought I loved her. I thought we'd build a life together. What happened? I started to see who she really was, the way she talked about the Mexican workers on her father's ranch, like they were less than human, the way she treated servants and shopkeepers, anyone she considered beneath her, the casual cruelty she thought was sophisticated humor." He shook his head. "And then I realized she didn't actually love me. She loved the idea of me, a strong, capable man she could show off at social events. But she wanted to change everything about who I really was. She wanted me to give up ranching, to work in her father's bank, to become part of their world. When I told her I wanted to buy my own land, start my own ranch, she laughed, said it was a childish fantasy and I needed to grow up and accept reality. So you broke the engagement." "I did. It caused a scandal. Everyone thought I was insane to give up the Pemberton money and connections. Victoria was humiliated, which was probably the worst thing I could have done to her. She married that lawyer from Austin within 6 months, I think partly to prove she didn't need me, and I bought this land and started building the double R." He turned to look at Evelyn directly. "I've never regretted my choice, not once. But Victoria, she's never forgiven me for choosing my own path over her plans. This thing with Whitmore, it's her way of finally getting revenge." Evelyn's heart ached for him, for the position he was in, for the unfairness of being punished for following his dreams. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. It's not your fault." "No, but—" She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "But I'm not helping your situation, am I? Having me at the ranch, defending me publicly, it just gives Victoria more ammunition against you. If I left, went somewhere else, maybe she'd back off." "Don't." The word came out sharp, almost harsh. Caleb closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Don't even think that. You're not going anywhere, Evelyn. You and Clara are part of the double R now, and I won't let Victoria or anyone else drive you away. But your ranch will survive or fall on its own merits, not because I sacrifice people I care about to appease someone like Victoria Pemberton." His eyes searched her face, intense and earnest. "You matter, Evelyn. You matter to me, more than you know." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that Evelyn was afraid to examine too closely. She was acutely aware of his hands on her shoulders, the warmth of his touch through the thin fabric of her dress, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. Her breath caught in her throat. "Caleb, Whatever she'd been about to say was lost as the barn door opened and light spilled out, along with Margaret's voice calling for them. Caleb dropped his hands and stepped back, the moment broken. When Margaret appeared around the corner of the barn, she took one look at their faces and frowned. "What's happened? Besides Victoria's dramatic announcement, I mean." "Nothing," Caleb said, his voice back to its usual steady tone. "I just needed some air. We should head home. It's getting late." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Evelyn stared out at the dark landscape, replaying Caleb's words over and over. "You matter to me, more than you know." What did that mean? Was it just the concern of an employer for an employee? The protective instinct of a good man towards someone vulnerable? Or was it something more, something deeper, something that matched the complicated feelings growing in her own heart? She told herself not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment and heartbreak. But despite her best efforts, a small flame of possibility flickered to life in her chest and refused to be extinguished. They collected Clara from Mrs. Chen's house. The baby was sleeping peacefully, worn out from an evening of being doted on, and made their way back to the Double R. After putting Clara to bed, Evelyn should have gone to her own room, should have let the evening end. But she found herself drawn back downstairs, where lamplight showed that Caleb was still awake in his study. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Can I come in?" He looked up from the papers spread across his desk and nodded. "Can't sleep either?" "Too much on my mind." She stepped into the room, taking in the organized chaos of ledgers and correspondence and maps. "What are you working on?" "Trying to figure out my options. Looking at the numbers, seeing how much debt I actually have versus the value of the property." He rubbed his eyes tiredly. "It's not as bad as it could be, but it's not good either. I've reinvested most of the profits back into the ranch, buying better breeding stock, improving the land, expanding the herds. It's made the Double R more valuable, but it's also left me vulnerable to pressure from creditors." Evelyn moved closer, studying the figures he'd written out in neat columns. "How much would you need to be completely independent of the Pemberton Bank?" "About $5,000. That would pay off the outstanding loans and give me enough operating capital to manage without credit for a year or two." He laughed bitterly. "Might as well be $5 million for all the chance I have of getting my hands on that much cash." "What about the other ranchers you mentioned, the alliance?" "That helps with ongoing operations, but it doesn't solve the immediate debt problem. And even if we all banded together, the Pembertons have too much influence. They can undercut us, refuse to do business with us, make it impossible to operate in this county." He leaned back in his chair, looking more discouraged than Evelyn had ever seen him. "I keep telling myself there has to be a way out, but I'm starting to think Victoria's already won." "You can't give up," Evelyn said fiercely. "You can't let her win. This ranch is your dream, your life's work. There has to be something we can do." "We?" Caleb looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Evelyn, this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is. You made it my fight when you gave me shelter and protection and a place to call home. You made it my fight when you stood up for me against Victoria, when you defended my honor to the whole town. You think I'm going to just stand by and watch her destroy everything you've built?" She shook her head. "I may not have money or connections, but I'm not helpless. There must be something I can do to help." Caleb stood and came around the desk, stopping just in front of her. In the lamplight, his face was all planes and shadows, handsome and tired and determined. "You already help just by being here. You and Margaret and Clara, you remind me why I'm fighting for this place. It's not just about the land or the cattle anymore. It's about building something that matters, something that can be a home for people who need one." "Like me," Evelyn said quietly. "Like you," he agreed. "But also like Tom, who was working himself to death on someone else's ranch before I hired him. Like Miguel, who crossed the border with nothing but the clothes on his back and is now saving money to bring his family north. Like all of us who are trying to make something better than what we had before." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made Evelyn's breath catch. "You make me believe it's possible. You've been through hell, Evelyn, and you're still standing, still fighting, still believing in a better future. That's worth more than all the money in the Pemberton Bank." His hand lingered near her face, and Evelyn found herself leaning into the touch without consciously deciding to do so. The space between them felt charged, electric, full of things unspoken but deeply felt. She could smell the faint scent of leather and sage that always clung to him, could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Caleb?" she whispered, not even sure what she was asking for. He leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, and Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. This was it, the moment she'd been simultaneously longing for and dreading, the moment when everything would change between them. She should stop this, should step back, should remember all the reasons why this was impossible. But she couldn't move, couldn't think, could only stand there hoping with desperate intensity that he would close the remaining distance. "There you two are!" Margaret's voice shattered the moment like a stone through glass. She appeared in the doorway, oblivious to what she'd interrupted. "I just had the most wonderful idea. Evelyn, how would you feel about organizing a harvest festival here at the ranch? We could invite the neighboring ranchers and their families, show everyone that the Double R is thriving, build goodwill in the community. It might help counter some of Victoria's influence. Caleb had stepped back immediately when Margaret spoke, putting a respectable distance between himself and Evelyn. His expression was carefully neutral, but Evelyn could see tension in the set of his jaw. That's actually not a bad idea, Margaret. Of course it's not a bad idea. When have I ever had a bad idea? Margaret was warming to her theme now, completely missing the charged atmosphere in the room. We could do it in 2 weeks before the weather turns. Evelyn, you've organized events before, haven't you? In Boston? Yes. The families I worked for often hosted gatherings. Evelyn forced herself to focus on Margaret's words instead of the phantom warmth of Caleb's almost touch. But nothing on the scale you're suggesting. Well, it's time to learn. We'll work together. Between the two of us, we can pull off something impressive. Good food, music, maybe some games for the children. Show everyone that the Double R is more than just a ranch. It's a community. Margaret beamed at them both. This is going to be perfect. I can feel it. After Margaret finally went to bed, still chattering excitedly about party plans, Evelyn and Caleb were left alone again in the study. But the moment had passed, the spell broken. The careful distance was back between them, the walls rebuilt. I should go to bed, Evelyn said, not quite meeting his eyes. Long day tomorrow if we're planning a festival. Evelyn, wait! Caleb's voice stopped her at the door. What almost happened just now? Nothing happened, Evelyn said quickly, too quickly. Margaret came in before. Nothing happened. But it almost did, Caleb said quietly. And we should probably talk about— There's nothing to talk about, Evelyn interrupted, panic rising in her chest. If they talked about it, if they put words to those charged moments, it would become real. And if it became real, she'd have to face all the reasons why it was impossible, all the ways it could go wrong and leave her more broken than before. It was late. We were both emotional about Victoria's announcement. The moment got confused, that's all. She could see from his expression that he didn't believe her, that he knew she was running scared. But to her relief, he didn't push. All right, if that's how you want to handle it. It is. Good night, Caleb. She fled upstairs before he could say anything else, her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. In her room, Clara was sleeping peacefully, innocent of all the adult complications swirling around her. Evelyn sank down beside the cradle and watched her daughter's chest rise and fall with each breath. I'm making such a mess of things, she whispered to the sleeping baby. I'm falling in love with a man I can't have, in a place where we'll never truly belong. What am I supposed to do? Clara didn't answer, of course, but her peaceful sleep was a reminder that whatever else happened, Evelyn had responsibilities that went beyond her own confused feelings. She had a daughter to raise, a life to build, a future to secure. Falling for Caleb Rowan was a luxury she couldn't afford, no matter how much her heart insisted otherwise. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of festival preparations. True to her word, Margaret threw herself into the planning with the enthusiasm of a general preparing for battle. Lists were made, supplies were ordered, invitations were sent to every rancher and farmer within a day's ride. The ranch hands were conscripted to help with setup, building tables, and preparing the grounds. Even Caleb got involved, though Evelyn noticed he seemed to be avoiding being alone with her whenever possible. That should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a loss. Sarah came out from town to help with the cooking preparations, bringing with her several other women who'd warmed to Evelyn over the past months. They spent long days in the kitchen, baking pies and cakes, preparing dishes that could be made ahead and reheated. The house filled with the smells of cinnamon and apples, of roasting meat and fresh bread. It was exhausting work, but there was something satisfying about it too, about being part of a group of women working toward a common goal. This is going to be the talk of the county, Sarah said, rolling out pie dough with practiced efficiency. Everyone's already gossiping about it. Victoria Pemberton is furious, apparently. She sees it as a direct challenge to her authority. Good, Margaret said firmly. Let her be furious. Let her see that we're not intimidated by her threats or her Dallas businessman. 2 days before the festival, a letter arrived by special courier. Caleb opened it at the dinner table, and Evelyn watched his face go very still as he read. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode. It's from Whitmore, he said quietly. He's making a formal offer for the Double R. $50,000. The table went silent. That was an enormous sum, far more than the ranch was actually worth, and everyone knew it. It was the kind of offer designed to be impossible to refuse, the kind that would set a man up for life with money to spare. "That's," Tom started, then stopped, clearly unsure what to say. "It's a trap," Caleb said flatly. "He's offering more than fair value because he knows that if I sell, it'll prove to every other rancher that the Pembertons can force anyone out if they want to. It'll break the alliance before it even really starts. And he's betting that I'm practical enough to take the money and run." "Are you?" Miguel asked carefully. "It is much money, boss." "I'm not selling." Caleb's voice was steel. "I don't care if he offers 100,000. This ranch isn't for sale." After dinner, Evelyn found Caleb in the barn, checking on the horses. He was brushing down his favorite mare, his movements methodical and soothing to the animal. She stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her courage before speaking. $50,000 is life-changing money. Caleb didn't turn around. "You think I should take it?" "I think you should consider it. That's enough to buy another property somewhere else. Somewhere outside Victoria's influence. You could start over, build something even better." "Is that what you'd do? Run away and start over somewhere else?" The question hit harder than he probably intended. Evelyn thought about Boston, about running from the whispers and the judgment, about arriving in Willow Creek hoping for a fresh start. "I've done plenty of running in my life. I'm not sure I can advise anyone else on the subject." Caleb finally turned to face her, leaning against the horse's flank. "You want to know the real reason I won't sell? It's not just pride, though God knows I've got plenty of that. It's because if I give in now, Victoria wins. She proves that she can manipulate people into doing what she wants, that money and influence are all that matter. And every other small rancher in this county learns that lesson too. They learn that fighting is useless, that people like the Pembertons always win in the end. And if you fight and lose anyway, if Whitmore finds a way to force the sale or ruin you financially, then at least I went down fighting," Caleb said. "At least I proved that some things matter more than money." He moved closer to her, his expression intense. "You understand that, Evelyn. You left everything behind in Boston rather than give up Clara. You could have made your life easier by letting someone else raise her, by pretending she didn't exist, but you didn't. You chose the hard path because it was the right path. That's different. Clara is my daughter. And the double R is my life's work. It's the same principle. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you." He was close enough now that she could see the determination in his eyes, the unwavering conviction that made him who he was. "I need you to understand that, because if you're going to stay here, if you're going to be part of this, you need to know that I'm not backing down, no matter what happens." "I understand," Evelyn said softly, "and I'm not going anywhere." The festival day arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperatures, just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. People started arriving mid-morning, wagons rolling up the drive carrying families dressed in their Sunday best. The neighboring ranchers came, bringing their wives and children. Shopkeepers from town arrived, and farmers from the outlying areas. Even some of Victoria's social circle showed up, though whether from genuine interest or the desire to report back to her, Evelyn couldn't tell. The gathering exceeded even Margaret's optimistic expectations. The long tables set up under the trees groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. Children ran wild, playing games and exploring the ranch under the watchful eyes of their parents. The ranch hands had set up an area for horseshoe throwing and target shooting, and friendly competitions broke out among the men. Women clustered in groups, exchanging recipes and gossip, and admiring each other's needlework. Evelyn moved through it all with Clara on her hip, making sure food was replenished and guests were comfortable. She'd worried about how she'd be received, but most people were friendly enough. Some were still distant, still judgmental, but others greeted her warmly, complimenting her on the organization and thanking her for the hospitality. "You've done a beautiful job," Mrs. Chen said, appearing at Evelyn's elbow with a plate of food. "This reminds people what community should be. Everyone welcome, everyone valued." As the afternoon wore on, someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing broke out on the cleared area near the barn. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, swaying Clara gently in her arms as the music played. She saw Caleb moving through the crowd, talking with the other ranchers, shaking hands, laughing at shared jokes. He looked happy and relaxed in a way she rarely saw him, and something in her chest loosened at the sight. "May I cut in?" Evelyn turned to find Sheriff Patterson standing beside her, a friendly smile on his weathered face. "I'm not dancing, Sheriff, just watching." "Then may I watch with you?" At her nod, he settled beside her, his sharp eyes taking in the gathering. "This is good work you and the Rowans have done here. Building bridges, showing people that cooperation matters more than competition." "I hope it helps," Evelyn said quietly, "with the trouble Victoria Pemberton's been causing." The sheriff's expression turned serious. "I've heard about that. Whitmore's offer and all. For what it's worth, most folks in the county are on Caleb's side. They know what Victoria's trying to do, and they don't like it. But knowing and being able to stop it are two different things." He paused. "You care about him, don't you? About Caleb?" The direct question caught Evelyn off guard. He's my employer. He's been very kind to me." "That's not what I asked." The sheriff's tone was gentle but knowing. "I've been keeping the peace in this county for 20 years, Miss Carter. I've learned to read people. And I can see the way you look at him, the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Just be careful. People are going to talk, and when they talk, it can cause trouble for everyone involved." Before Evelyn could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A fancy carriage was pulling up the drive, dust rising behind it. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized the gilded details, the matched pair of horses. Victoria Pemberton had arrived. The music faltered and stopped as Victoria descended from the carriage, followed by Harold Whitmore and Mr. Pemberton. She was dressed in lavender silk that must have cost a fortune, her hair arranged in elaborate curls, her parasol matching her dress perfectly. She looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion plate, completely out of place among the simpler ranch gathering. "Well," she called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard, "what a charming little party. And here I thought we hadn't been invited. Mr. Whitmore, doesn't this look rustic and authentic?" Whitmore smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Very authentic indeed, Miss Pemberton." Caleb appeared from the crowd, his expression carefully neutral. "Victoria, Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Pemberton, we weren't expecting you." "Oh, but surely you wouldn't want to exclude us from such a community event." Victoria's smile was as false as her cheerful tone. "After all, my family has been part of this county for generations. We have as much right to be here as anyone." "Of course," Caleb said evenly. "Everyone's welcome. Help yourselves to food and drink." "How generous." Victoria's eyes swept the gathering, lingering on Evelyn with calculated disdain. "I see your household help is playing hostess. How very democratic of you, Caleb, though I wonder what your guests think about socializing with a woman of questionable virtue." The insult was delivered with such sweet venom that it took a moment for the full impact to register. Evelyn felt her face flush, felt every eye in the gathering turn toward her. The sheriff beside her muttered something that sounded like a curse, and Caleb went very, very still. "That's enough, Victoria." But Victoria was just getting started. She moved closer to Evelyn, her eyes glittering with malice. "I've been hearing such interesting stories about you, Miss Carter, about how you arrived in Willow Creek claiming to be a mail-order bride, but really, what respectable man would order a bride who comes with another man's bastard in her arms? Makes a person wonder what your real profession was back east. Makes a person wonder what services you're really providing here at the Double R." The implication was clear and devastating. Around them, people were gasping, murmuring, backing away from Evelyn as if scandal were contagious. Evelyn's arms tightened around Clara, her whole body trembling with shame and fury. She wanted to defend herself, to throw Victoria's own hypocrisy back in her face, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stand there, while her reputation, what little remained of it, was shredded in front of the entire county. "I said that's enough!" Caleb's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. He moved to stand directly in front of Victoria, and something in his face made even that supremely confident woman take a step back. "You've crossed a line, Victoria. You've insulted a guest in my home. You've impugned the honor of a woman who's done nothing but work hard and live honestly. And you've proven to everyone here exactly what kind of person you really are." His voice was cold, controlled, and absolutely final. "You're not welcome on my property. Not now. Not ever. I want you gone. Now. You can't throw me out, Victoria said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. My father. Your father can take his business elsewhere. I don't need his bank. I don't need his connections. And I sure as hell don't need his poisonous daughter showing up at my home and attacking people under my protection. Caleb looked at Whitmore. And you can take your offer and shove it. The double R isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. Not now, not ever. You're making a mistake, Whitmore said smoothly. That offer won't stand forever. And without the Pembertons' goodwill, you'll find it very difficult to do business in this county. Then I'll do business elsewhere, but I won't sell my integrity to someone like you. Caleb turned to Tom, who'd appeared at his shoulder. Tom, escort these people off my property. If they refuse to leave, send someone for the sheriff. I'm already here, Sheriff Patterson said, stepping forward. And I'd advise you folks to accept Mr. Rowan's hospitality withdrawal gracefully. Otherwise, we might have to discuss Miss Pemberton's public slander, which is a crime in this county. Victoria's face flushed with fury, but she was smart enough to recognize when she'd lost. She spun on her heel and marched back to her carriage, Whitmore and her father following. The crowd parted silently to let them through, and within moments the carriage was rolling back down the drive, dust rising in its wake. For a long moment after they left, no one moved. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then faster, until applause rippled through the entire gathering. Men were nodding approvingly, women were smiling, and the children who'd stopped playing to watch the drama resumed their games as if nothing had happened. Sarah appeared at Evelyn's side and took her arm. Come on, let's get you inside for a minute. Evelyn let herself be led into the house, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. In the kitchen, Sarah pressed a glass of water into her free hand while Margaret took Clara, murmuring soothing nonsense to the baby. I'm so sorry, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. I've ruined everything. The festival, Caleb's reputation, his business relationships. You haven't ruined anything, Margaret said firmly. Victoria ruined herself. Did you see people's faces? They were disgusted by her behavior, not yours. And Caleb, she smiled. Caleb just proved to everyone that he's a man of principle, that he won't be bought or bullied or manipulated. That's worth more than any business deal. But he said he doesn't need the Pembertons' support. That's not true. Their bank holds his loans. Actually, Sarah said quietly, it might be more true than you think. My father's been talking with the other merchants. None of us like the way the Pembertons have been throwing their weight around, trying to control everything and everyone. There's been discussion of starting a new bank, pooling our resources, creating an alternative. If Caleb's standing up to them, others might finally feel brave enough to do the same. The kitchen door opened, and Caleb entered, his face still tight with anger. He looked at Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted. Are you all right? I should be asking you that. You just burned every bridge with the most powerful family in the county for me. I didn't do it for you, Caleb said, then immediately shook his head. That came out wrong. I mean, I did, but not just for you. I did it because it was right. Because I'm tired of people like Victoria thinking they can say and do whatever they want without consequences. Because some lines shouldn't be crossed. And watching someone tear apart a good woman for her own petty satisfaction is one of them. He moved closer, taking Evelyn's hand in his. And I did it because you're important to me, Evelyn. More important than business deals or social standing or playing politics with people I despise. If standing up for you means making enemies, then I'll make enemies. I don't care anymore. Evelyn stared at him, at their joined hands, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, and she knew with absolute certainty that she'd passed the point of no return. She was completely, irrevocably in love with Caleb Rowan, and nothing good could come of it, but she couldn't stop it, couldn't fight it anymore. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now, Caleb said. We go back out there and finish hosting this festival. We show everyone that we're not intimidated, that we're not backing down. And tomorrow, we figure out what comes next. They returned to the gathering together, and if people noticed that Caleb kept close to Evelyn's side for the rest of the afternoon, no one commented. The festival continued, the music resumed, and by the time the sun set and guests began departing, it was generally agreed that the event had been a tremendous success. More than one rancher made a point of shaking Caleb's hand and thanking him for his stand, and several women approached Evelyn to offer their support. But after everyone had left and the cleanup was done, Evelyn lay awake long into the night, Clara sleeping peacefully beside her, thinking about what had happened and what it meant. Caleb had defended her honor, had thrown away important business connections to protect her, had made himself a target of Victoria Pemberton's considerable vindictiveness. And he'd done it all without hesitation, without calculating the cost. She thought about his hand in hers, warm and strong and steady. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, like she mattered more than anything else in that moment. She thought about all the small kindnesses he'd shown her since that first day at the train station, all the ways he'd made her feel valued and protected and, impossibly, cherished. And she thought about the secret she'd been carrying, the truth she hadn't told him. Because while she'd been honest about Clara's illegitimacy, she hadn't been entirely honest about the circumstances. She hadn't told him that Clara's father wasn't some charming scoundrel who'd seduced and abandoned her. She hadn't told him that the man who'd fathered her daughter had been married, had been her employer, had used his position of power to manipulate a situation that left her with nowhere to turn. She hadn't told him that, when she'd finally gathered the courage to tell the man she was pregnant, he'd laughed and said it was her problem to solve, then dismissed her without references and spread rumors that ensured she'd never work as a governess again. If Caleb knew the full truth, knew that she'd been complicit, however unwillingly, in adultery, would he still defend her? Would he still look at her with that fierce protectiveness in his eyes? Or would he see her the way the rest of the world did, as a woman who'd brought her troubles on herself through poor judgment and loose morals? The questions kept her awake until dawn, and when Clara finally woke for her morning feeding, Evelyn was no closer to answers than she'd been hours before. All she knew was that everything was changing, faster than she could control, and sooner or later she was going to have to decide whether to trust Caleb with the whole truth or continue living with the weight of secrets between them. The telegram arrived 3 days after the festival, delivered by a rider who'd been paid extra to make the journey from town at speed. Evelyn was in the kitchen helping Margaret prepare lunch when Tom came to the back door, his face grave, holding the yellow envelope that everyone recognized as carrying either important news or terrible news, and rarely anything in between. "It's for Miss Carter," he said quietly. The clerk said it came from Boston. Evelyn's hands stilled in the bread dough she'd been kneading. Boston. She hadn't heard from anyone back east in months, had assumed that part of her life was closed forever. With trembling fingers, she wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. Margaret watched with concern as Evelyn opened it and read the brief message inside. The words blurred for a moment as her mind tried to make sense of them. Then clarity came, sharp and stunning. Thomas Whitfield deceased. Accident in California mining operation. Left property and funds to intended bride. Evelyn Carter per letters of intent. Estate lawyer requests immediate contact. Your presence required for settlement. Cornelius Blackwood, attorney at law, San Francisco. Evelyn read it twice, 3 times, trying to absorb the information. Thomas Whitfield, the man who'd abandoned her at the train station, the coward who'd run away to California rather than face his promises, was dead. And somehow, impossibly, he'd left her his property and money. "What is it?" Margaret asked gently. Evelyn handed her the telegram without a word. Margaret read it quickly, her eyebrows rising with each line. When she finished, she looked up at Evelyn with an expression of mixed emotions. "Well," she said finally, "that's unexpected." "It doesn't make sense," Evelyn said, finding her voice. "Why would he leave me anything? He abandoned me. He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me." "Guilt, maybe. Or perhaps he had more honor than we gave him credit for, and he wanted to make things right." Margaret set the telegram on the table. "Whatever his reasons, it seems you've inherited something substantial. Property and funds. That's not nothing, Evelyn." Caleb appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. "What's happened?" Margaret handed him the telegram, and Evelyn watched his face as he read it. His expression was carefully controlled, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like worry. "This is good news," he said, his voice measured. "This could give you options. Independence." "I suppose so," Evelyn said slowly, still trying to process it all. Though I'd need to go to San Francisco to settle the estate. That's a long journey, and I don't even know what I'd be claiming. It could be a shack and $50 for all we know. The telegram says property and funds, Caleb pointed out, plural. And if there's an estate lawyer involved, it's probably substantial enough to be worth the journey. He set the telegram down and looked at her directly. You should go. Find out what you've inherited. It could change everything for you and Clara. There was something in his tone that made Evelyn's chest tighten. He was being practical, supportive, exactly what a good employer should be. But underneath, she sensed distance, a pulling away that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. I can't just leave, she protested. There's work to be done here, and Margaret needs help, and you need to secure your future, Margaret interrupted firmly. Evelyn, this is an opportunity. Maybe the only one you'll get. You have to take it. Over the next few days, the reality of the situation began to sink in. After some correspondence with the lawyer in San Francisco, the details became clearer. Thomas Whitfield had indeed died in a mining accident, crushed when a tunnel collapsed. He'd been carrying significant wealth, gold he'd managed to extract before the accident, and he'd left a will naming Evelyn as his beneficiary. The property included a house in San Francisco, some mining claims, and approximately $8,000 in cash and gold. It was a fortune, more money than Evelyn had ever imagined having, enough to set herself up independently, to buy a home, to never have to depend on anyone else's charity again, enough to give Clara everything Evelyn had never been able to provide: education, opportunities, a future free from the stigma of her birth. She should have been elated. Instead, she felt hollow. The problem was the ranch. The problem was Margaret's friendship and the life she'd built here. The problem was the way Sentinel Peak looked at sunset, and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, and the simple satisfaction of honest work well done. The problem was Caleb. Since the telegram arrived, he'd been different with her, still kind, still considerate, but with a new formality that hurt more than open coldness would have. He no longer sought her out in the evenings, no longer sat with her on the porch watching the stars. He was giving her space, she realized, letting her make her decision without feeling obligated to him or the ranch. It was considerate and thoughtful, and it was breaking her heart. A week after the telegram arrived, Sarah came out to the ranch with news of her own. She burst into the kitchen where Evelyn was working, her face flushed with excitement. You'll never believe what's happened. The merchants have done it. We're starting our own bank. My father's putting in $10,000. The Johnsons are contributing $5,000. The Chens another $3,000. We've got commitments from nearly every business owner in town except the Pembertons. We're calling it the Willow Creek Community Bank, and we're offering to refinance all of Caleb's loans at better terms than the Pemberton Bank ever gave him. Margaret let out a whoop of joy and hugged Sarah so hard she squeaked. That's wonderful. Does Caleb know? My father's writing out this afternoon to tell him officially, but I wanted you all to hear it from me first. Sarah's eyes found Evelyn's. Your festival did this, you know. Seeing Caleb stand up to Victoria, seeing how the community rallied behind him, it gave people courage. They realized they didn't have to accept the Pembertons' control anymore. That wasn't me, Evelyn said quietly. That was all Caleb. Maybe. But you were the reason he found his courage. Sarah smiled. Everyone can see it, you know, the way he looks at you, the way he's been miserable since that telegram came. Evelyn's throat tightened. He's been perfectly fine. He's been walking around like a man who's lost something precious and doesn't know how to get it back, Sarah corrected. Evelyn, I know it's not my place, but are you really going to leave? Go to San Francisco and claim your inheritance and never come back? I don't know, Evelyn admitted. Part of me thinks I should. It's what makes sense. Take the money, start fresh somewhere new, give Clara every advantage. But another part of me... She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Another part of you has found a home here, Margaret said gently. Another part of you has fallen in love with a stubborn rancher who's too honorable to tell you how he feels because he thinks you deserve better than a life of hard work in the middle of nowhere. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. He does think I deserve better. He's been making that clear all week. Then maybe it's time you told him what you actually want, Sarah said. Before you both make choices you'll regret for the rest of your lives. That evening, Evelyn finally found the courage to seek out Caleb. She found him in the barn, as she'd known she would, working late to avoid the house and the awkward conversations that had become their new normal. He looked up as she entered, and something vulnerable flashed across his face before he could hide it. "I'm leaving for San Francisco next week," she said without preamble. "I've arranged for Mrs. Chen to travel with me and Clara. It's safer for two women traveling together, and she has family there she wants to visit." Caleb's hand stilled on the harness he'd been mending. "That's good. Smart planning." "I'll be gone for at least a month, maybe longer. It depends on how complicated the estate settlement is." She took a breath. "Margaret says my position here will be waiting when I get back. If I want it." "Of course it will be. You're part of the Double R now." His voice was carefully neutral. "But Evelyn, you need to understand. With $8,000 in property in San Francisco, you don't need this job anymore. You could set yourself up comfortably, hire help if you need it, give Clara every advantage. You don't have to come back to breaking your back on a ranch." "What if I want to come back?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb finally looked at her directly, and the longing in his eyes made her breath catch. "Then you'd be making a choice I'm not sure you should make," he said quietly. "Evelyn, you deserve more than this life. You deserve comfort and security and a future without gossip following you everywhere. You deserve someone who can give you the world, not just a struggling ranch and a reputation that'll never quite recover from being associated with me." "That's not your decision to make," Evelyn said, moving closer. "You don't get to decide what I deserve or what I want. Then what do you want?" The words came out raw, almost desperate. "Tell me, Evelyn, because I've been going crazy trying to figure it out. One minute I think maybe you feel the same way I do, and the next you're talking about San Francisco like it's your salvation." "Maybe it is," Evelyn said, and watched pain flash across his face. "Or maybe it's just money and property that belonged to a man who never deserved me in the first place. But I won't know what it means until I go see for myself." She took another step closer, close enough now to see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "There's something I need to tell you, though. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Caleb waited, his entire body tense. "Clara's father wasn't some charming scoundrel who seduced and abandoned me," Evelyn said, forcing the words out past the shame that still clung to them. "He was my employer in Boston, a married man with 3 children and a spotless reputation. He was 20 years older than me, and he had all the power in our situation. I was young and naive and flattered by his attention. I didn't realize until too late that he was manipulating me, using his position to take what he wanted." She watched Caleb's face carefully, waiting for the disgust, the judgment, the withdrawal of respect. But what she saw instead was fury, not directed at her, but on her behalf. "He forced you," Caleb said, his voice tight. "Not exactly. I said yes, eventually, after months of him wearing down my resistance, making me believe he cared about me, promising things he never intended to deliver." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. "When I told him I was pregnant, he laughed, said it was my problem to solve. He fired me without references and made sure every family in Boston knew why, so I'd never work as a governess again. I was destitute and pregnant and completely alone. That's when I placed the advertisement that Thomas Whitfield answered." "Jesus, Evelyn." Caleb moved toward her, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders gently. "That man, what he did to you, that was abuse. You understand that, right? He used his power over you, manipulated you, ruined your reputation to protect his own. None of that is your fault." "Society doesn't see it that way," Evelyn said bitterly. "To them, I'm just another fallen woman who should have known better." "Society can go to hell," Caleb said fiercely. "You were taken advantage of by someone who should have protected you. You survived it, kept your baby, built a new life from nothing. That's not shameful, Evelyn. That's strength. That's courage." His hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "And it doesn't change anything about how I feel about you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "How do you feel about me, Caleb?" For a long moment, he just looked at her, his thumbs brushing away the tears that spilled down her cheeks. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'm in love with you. Have been for months, probably since the moment you stood up in that general store and refused to let the world break you. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you love Clara with your whole heart. I love how hard you work and how you're never afraid to speak your mind and how you make me want to be better than I am." He took a shaky breath. "But I also know that loving you means wanting what's best for you, even if that's not me. Even if that means you take your inheritance and build a life in San Francisco where nobody knows your story and you can start completely fresh." "And if what's best for me is right here," Evelyn asked, her hands coming up to cover his where they still cradled her face, "if I don't want to start fresh somewhere else, if I want to build on what I've already found here, then I'm not going anywhere," Caleb said simply. "I'll be here when you get back from San Francisco. I'll be here for as long as you want me." Evelyn rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain, but when Caleb's arms came around her and pulled her close, uncertainty gave way to the rightness of it, the inevitability. This was what she'd been afraid to hope for, what she'd convinced herself she couldn't have. And yet here it was, real and solid and wonderful. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably ask you properly. When you come back from San Francisco, if you come back, will you marry me, Evelyn Carter?" "Yes," Evelyn said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you. But Caleb, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to San Francisco to decide whether I want this life or that one. I've already decided. I'm going to settle the estate, claim what's rightfully mine, and bring it back here. Because this is where I belong. With you, with Margaret, with this ranch. This is home." Caleb's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "You're sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be the wife of a rancher, and that's hard work and long hours and exactly what I want," Evelyn interrupted. "I'm sure, Caleb. More sure than I've been of anything in my life." They stood there in the barn, wrapped in each other's arms, while the horses stirred in their stalls and the night sounds of the ranch settled around them. It felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that would last. But there was still so much uncertainty ahead, so many obstacles to overcome. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb spoke quietly. "Victoria's not going to give up, you know. When she finds out about your inheritance, about us, she'll use it somehow. Try to twist it into something ugly." "Let her try," Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. "She doesn't get to control my life anymore. None of them do." The journey to San Francisco was grueling but uneventful. Mrs. Chen proved to be an excellent traveling companion, unfailingly cheerful and surprisingly well-informed about the intricacies of estate law. She'd made the journey several times over the years and knew all the best places to stop, which hotels to avoid, how to navigate the chaos of the rapidly growing city. San Francisco itself was a revelation, loud and dirty and teeming with people from every corner of the world, all of them chasing dreams of gold and opportunity. It bore no resemblance to Boston's old-world elegance or Texas's open spaces. It was something entirely new, a city inventing itself as it grew, and Evelyn found it both exciting and overwhelming. The meeting with Cornelius Blackwood, the estate lawyer, revealed that Thomas Whitfield had been more successful in California than anyone back in Willow Creek had imagined. The house was substantial, a 3-story Victorian in a respectable neighborhood that needed work but had good bones. The mining claims were in a productive area, currently being operated under contract by another company, and the $8,000 was actually closer to 11 once all the assets were liquidated. "Mr. Whitfield left explicit instructions," Blackwood explained, adjusting his spectacles. "He wanted everything to go to you, Miss Carter. He wrote a letter explaining his reasoning, which I'm obligated to share with you." He handed her an envelope, and with trembling hands, Evelyn opened it. Thomas Whitfield's handwriting was shakier than in his earlier letters, perhaps written when he was already unwell or sensing danger in the mines. "Dear Miss Carter," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I am dead and you are, rightfully, confused about why I'm leaving you anything at all. The truth is simple. I was a coward. I made promises to you that I fully intended to keep when I wrote those letters. But when opportunity knocked in California, I panicked. I told myself that gold claims were more valuable than marriage, that I could always send for you later, that you'd understand and forgive. But I knew, even then, that I was simply running away from responsibility, like I've run from everything else in my life. This inheritance is my attempt to make amends. It won't undo the wrong I did you, but perhaps it will give you and your daughter the future I should have helped you build. I hope you can forgive me, though I don't deserve it. Thomas Whitfield. Evelyn read the letter twice, emotions warring inside her. Anger at the man's cowardice mixed with a strange sort of pity. He'd been weak, had made terrible choices, but in the end he'd tried to do right by her. It didn't absolve him, but it was something. "What do you want to do with the property?" Blackwood asked. "The house is worth approximately $3,000 in its current condition, more if renovated. The mining claims generate about $200 per month in royalties. You could live quite comfortably here if you chose to." Evelyn looked around the lawyer's office, thinking about what this inheritance meant. It was freedom, pure and simple. Freedom from poverty, from dependence, from the fear that had shadowed her since Clara's birth. She could stay in San Francisco, renovate the house, live as a respectable widow with independent means. No one here knew her story. She could be anyone, create any past she wanted. But freedom meant nothing if it meant leaving behind everything that actually mattered. "I want to sell the house," she said decisively. "Keep the mining claims generating income. I'll need those royalties. But sell the house and give me the cash. I'm going back to Texas." Blackwood looked surprised. "Are you certain? San Francisco offers opportunities that a place like Texas simply can't match." "I'm certain," Evelyn said. "Texas has what San Francisco never will. It has home." The return journey seemed to take forever, each day crawling by as Evelyn counted down the miles to Willow Creek. Mrs. Chen kept her company, entertaining Clara and sharing stories of her own youth in China and her immigration to America. By the time they finally rolled into Willow Creek on a crisp November afternoon, Evelyn was exhausted but filled with an anticipation that made her heart race. The ranch came into view, and Evelyn felt something in her chest ease. This was what she'd been missing, what she'd spent every day in San Francisco longing for. The wide-open spaces, the familiar outline of Sentinel Peak, the sturdy buildings that spoke of honest work and careful stewardship. Home. Caleb must have been watching for her, because he came striding out of the barn before the wagon had even fully stopped. His face was different than she remembered. Thinner, more careworn, as if the month apart had aged him years. But his eyes lit up when they found her, and his smile was everything she'd been dreaming about. "You came back," he said simply, reaching up to help her down from the wagon. "I told you I would," Evelyn replied. And then she was in his arms, and everything else faded away. The journey, the inheritance, the month of separation, none of it mattered anymore. She was home. Margaret appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, and let out a cry of joy. "You're here! Oh, thank God, I was starting to think you decided to stay in that fancy city after all." Over dinner, Evelyn told them everything about the house, the mining claims, the letter from Thomas Whitfield, and her decision to sell and return to Texas. When she mentioned the amount she'd received from the sale, Margaret gasped. $14,000 total? Evelyn, that's a fortune. "It's enough," Evelyn agreed. "Enough to contribute to the ranch, to help Caleb pay off his remaining debts, to build a future without the Pembertons breathing down our necks." Caleb looked uncomfortable. "Evelyn, I can't take your money. That's yours. Yours and Clara's security." "It's ours if we're getting married," Evelyn said firmly. "Which we are, unless you've changed your mind in the past month." "Never," Caleb said fiercely. "But I won't take your inheritance and leave you dependent on me. That's not how this works." "Then we'll invest it in the ranch together. Make me a partner, not just your wife. We'll build something that belongs to both of us, something we can pass down to Clara and any other children we might have." Evelyn reached across the table to take his hand. "I don't want to be taken care of, Caleb. I want to be an equal partner in building our life. Can you accept that?" Caleb looked at their joined hands, then up at her face, and slowly nodded. "Equal partners. I can accept that." The wedding was planned for Christmas Eve, giving them just over a month to prepare. Margaret threw herself into the arrangements with her usual enthusiasm, determined to make it the most beautiful wedding Willow Creek had ever seen. Sarah and the other women who'd become Evelyn's friends rallied around, offering help with everything from the dress to the flowers to the food. But not everyone was pleased with the news. Victoria Pemberton, when she heard about the engagement and the inheritance, made her displeasure known through increasingly petty acts of social sabotage. She spread rumors that Evelyn had somehow tricked or entrapped Caleb, that the inheritance was ill-gotten, that the wedding was a disaster waiting to happen. A few people listened, but most of the community had learned to take Victoria's opinions with a grain of salt. More seriously, her father made one final attempt to destroy Caleb financially. He called in a small loan that the community bank hadn't yet had time to refinance, demanding immediate payment. It was a final act of spite, designed to humiliate Caleb or force him to accept Whitmore's standing offer for the ranch. Caleb wrote the check without hesitation, using funds from Evelyn's inheritance with her full blessing. When he delivered it to the Pemberton Bank personally, he made sure to do it publicly, on a busy Saturday when half the town was on the main street. "Here's your money, Mr. Pemberton," he said clearly, his voice carrying, "paid in full. The Double R Ranch no longer owes you or your bank a single cent. And just so we're clear, I will never do business with you again. Neither will my future wife. Neither will any member of my family or household. You've spent years trying to control this county through loans and intimidation, but your reign is over. The community bank offers better terms, better service, and most importantly, they treat people with respect. I suggest you learn from their example." He walked out of the bank with his head high, leaving a stunned Mr. Pemberton and a room full of witnesses who would spread the story across the county by nightfall. It was a declaration of independence, a final severing of ties, and a warning to anyone else who thought they could use money to control people's lives. Victoria made one last desperate play 2 days before the wedding. She appeared at the ranch unannounced, dressed in traveling clothes, and asked to speak with Caleb privately. Evelyn watched from the window as they talked in the yard, Victoria gesticulating dramatically, Caleb standing with his arms crossed, his expression closed. After 10 minutes, Victoria threw up her hands in frustration and stalked back to her carriage. When Caleb came inside, Evelyn raised an eyebrow questioningly. "She wanted one more chance," he said wearily. "Said she'd made a mistake marrying her lawyer, that she'd always loved me, that she'd be willing to accept my ranching life if I'd reconsider. When I refused, she threatened to make a scene at the wedding, to stand up and object when the preacher asks if anyone has cause why we shouldn't marry." "And what did you say?" "I told her she was welcome to try, but that if she did, she'd face the judgment of the entire community who'd watched her behavior over the past months. I told her that people are tired of her dramatics, that she's burning every bridge she has, and that the best thing she could do is leave Willow Creek and start over somewhere else." He sighed. "She left crying. I almost felt sorry for her." "Almost?" "She made her choices. I'm not responsible for the consequences." He pulled Evelyn into his arms. "I'm only responsible for making sure you and Clara and any future family we have are happy and safe. Everything else is just noise." Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the kind of perfect winter day that seemed designed for celebrations. The church was packed, every pew filled with ranchers and farmers, merchants and their families, all dressed in their finest and eager to witness the wedding of the year. Someone had decorated with pine boughs and white ribbons, and candles glowed warmly throughout the sanctuary. Evelyn stood in the small room off the main sanctuary, Margaret fussing with her dress while Sarah arranged her hair. The dress was simple but beautiful, cream silk that Margaret had somehow acquired, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. Clara, now nearly a year old and pulling herself up on furniture, gurgled happily in a basket nearby, wearing a white dress that matched her mother's. "You look beautiful," Sarah said softly, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Caleb's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." "I'm nervous," Evelyn admitted. "What if Victoria really does make a scene? What if you focus on the fact that you're about to marry a good man who loves you?" Margaret interrupted firmly. "Whatever Victoria does or doesn't do, it can't change what matters. You and Caleb belong together. Everyone can see it." The music started. A simple hymn played on the church's slightly out-of-tune piano, and Margaret gathered up Clara while Sarah helped Evelyn with her bouquet of winter roses that had cost a small fortune but were absolutely perfect. Then Margaret opened the door, and it was time. The walk down the aisle seemed to take forever and no time at all. Evelyn was aware of faces turning to watch her, of whispers and smiles, and, yes, a few disapproving frowns from the last holdouts who would never accept her. But none of that mattered, because at the end of the aisle stood Caleb, looking handsome in a suit she'd never seen him wear before, his face full of such open love and joy that it took her breath away. When she reached him, he He took her hand and whispered, "You're beautiful." "You're not so bad yourself," she whispered back, and his resulting grin made her heart soar. The ceremony was simple and traditional. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through hard times and good. When he reached the part about objections, there was a tense moment of silence, and Evelyn felt her shoulders tighten. But no one spoke. Victoria Pemberton wasn't even in attendance, and the silence stretched on until the preacher nodded and continued. "Do you, Caleb James Rowan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Evelyn Margaret Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Evelyn said, her voice strong and clear. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." Caleb did thoroughly, to the applause and cheers of the gathered community. When they finally pulled apart, both flushed and grinning, Margaret stepped forward with Clara, who reached for Caleb with chubby arms. He took her easily, settling her on his hip, and in that moment they looked like what they were, a family, complete and whole, and ready to face whatever came next. The reception at the ranch was everything Margaret had promised: abundant food, lively music, dancing and laughter that lasted well into the night. People came up throughout the evening to congratulate them, to offer blessings and advice and the kind of community support that Evelyn had never experienced before. Even some of Victoria's former allies made a point of welcoming Evelyn into their circle, as if her marriage to Caleb had finally made her respectable in their eyes. As the evening wore on and Clara fell asleep in Evelyn's arms, exhausted by all the excitement, Caleb pulled his new wife aside for a moment of relative quiet on the porch. "Happy?" he asked simply. "More than I ever thought possible," Evelyn admitted. 6 months ago, I was standing on a train platform thinking my life was over, and now you're standing on your own porch, mistress of your own home, with a husband who adores you and a daughter who's going to grow up knowing she's loved and valued." Caleb wrapped his arms around both of them. "We're going to build something amazing here, Evelyn. Not just a ranch, but a real home. A place where people like us, people who've made mistakes or faced hard times or just needed a second chance, can find refuge." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been thinking about what you said once, about how this place gave you shelter when you needed it most. What if we made that part of our mission? What if we opened our doors to other women in situations like yours, was pregnant and alone, or running from abuse, or just needing a safe place to figure out their next steps?" His eyes were bright with the vision. "We've got the space, we've got the resources now with your inheritance invested in the ranch. Margaret's been talking about it for weeks. She thinks we should call it Haven House." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "You want to create a refuge? Here?" "If you're willing. I know it would mean more work, more complications. But you're proof that people can rebuild their lives if they're given a chance. Maybe we can offer that chance to others." Evelyn thought about the desperate woman she'd been, arriving with nothing but a baby and a broken promise. She thought about all the women still out there, facing judgment and impossible choices, and a world that offered no mercy to those who stumbled. And she thought about what it would mean to offer them what she'd been given, not just shelter and work, but genuine acceptance and the chance to prove themselves. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's do it. Let's build Haven House." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch continued to prosper under Caleb and Evelyn's joint management, with the mining royalties providing a steady cushion against bad years, and the community bank's support allowing for gradual expansion. Tom was eventually made a full partner, and Miguel brought his family north to live on the ranch, adding his wife's skills to the household operations. Haven House opened its doors in the spring of 1876, starting small with just one room converted to receive guests. The first woman who arrived was barely 17, 8 months pregnant, turned out by her family and with nowhere else to go. Evelyn welcomed her with the same words Caleb had once offered her: "You and your baby are safe here." More women followed over the years. Some stayed just long enough to have their babies and make plans. Others found permanent homes in the area, and a few even joined the ranch household permanently. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking, but it was also deeply meaningful. Each woman who passed through Haven House carried away with her the message that Evelyn had learned from Caleb: that past mistakes didn't define your future, that community mattered more than judgment, and that everyone deserved a second chance. Clara grew up strong and confident, loved not just by Evelyn and Caleb, but by the entire extended family of the ranch. She called Caleb Papa from the time she could talk, and he treated her exactly as he later treated the three children he and Evelyn had together, with patience, kindness, and unwavering devotion. Victoria Pemberton eventually left Willow Creek, moving to Dallas, where her father's connections allowed her to remarry into another wealthy family. The Pemberton Bank struggled after the community bank proved successful, and eventually Mr. Pemberton was forced to sell. The Pembertons' grip on the county was broken, replaced by a more cooperative and egalitarian approach to business and community building. On Christmas Eve, 1882, exactly 7 years after their wedding, Caleb and Evelyn stood on their porch watching the sun set over Sentinel Peak. 4 children played in the yard. Clara, now 8, and already showing signs of the strong woman she'd become, along with her 3 younger siblings. The ranch house had been expanded twice, and the barn that housed Haven House was lit with warm lamplight as 3 current residents prepared their own Christmas celebration. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, pulling Evelyn close against the winter chill. "Choosing this life instead of staying in San Francisco, where things might have been easier?" Evelyn looked at their children, at the thriving ranch, at the lights of Haven House where women were finding safety and hope. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the train platform where she'd thought her life was ending, the moment a cowboy had offered to hold both her and her baby, the slow building of trust and love and family. "Not for a single second," she said, rising up to kiss him. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." From the barn, a young woman emerged, newly arrived just 2 days ago, frightened and uncertain, clutching a newborn baby. She stood for a moment in the doorway, looking lost, until Evelyn waved and called out, "Come join us for hot cider. You and your baby are part of the family now." The woman's face lit up with cautious hope, and she started walking toward the house. Evelyn went down the steps to meet her, remembering another Christmas Eve 7 years ago when she'd been welcomed into her own new beginning. The circle continued, the refuge expanded, and love, stubborn, relentless, transformative love, kept building something beautiful from the broken pieces people brought. On a train platform in August 1875, a woman had been left behind with nothing but a baby and despair. But sometimes being left behind was really just the first step toward being found. And sometimes the cowboy who said, "Let me hold you both," was really saying, "Let me love you both forever," which turned out to be the truest promise of all.